everyone. Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon. Tonight we're going to be joined by my guest, Nathan. Nathan believes to be a MILAB victim. And for those that are not familiar with that, he will dive on into those discussions and explain everything that it is. But before we do that, a little bit of information here that I have to do. If you've ever had an encounter and you want to be on an episode of Tinfoil Tales, you can send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, and I'll get you scheduled for a future episode. Definitely have some cool things happening here. A lot more interest in the podcast. Some of these episodes are starting to really get some people looking into things, so it's something that I've been hoping would happen. A lot of topics that I feel like need to be discussed are actually starting to gain some traction, so that's a good thing. The podcast has been growing, so I definitely appreciate all of you that have been helping out doing that. You can find us on Facebook, like us on there. We're on other socials as well, but I typically don't use them. If you haven't been on the YouTube channel, you can head over there too. If you're on the YouTube channel, you can also stream these on all the other streaming platforms. Wherever you get your podcast from, we're available on that. You can leave us a review. The higher the ranking, the better that is that the podcast is more exposed to other people. So if you'd like to help out with that, just leave us a review. But we're going to go ahead and dive on in the discussions with Nathan. It's obviously going to be a very long discussion. I think this ends up being like the longest episode I've recorded so far. But it's definitely informative and definitely a lot. So again, take the time to thank Nathan before he hops on here for sharing his story. I know it's not easy for people to share. So I hope people that are out there listening take what it is that he says and make up your own opinions on it. I mean, that's what we're all here for. But anyways, we're going to bring Nathan on in. So hang tight and back in a few minutes. I'd like to take this time to welcome my guest tonight. Nathan, thanks for coming out and talking to me.
Thank you, Brandon. I really appreciate putting me on. My name is Nathan Ciszek. I'm a 49-year-old MILAB victim. I'm in the recovery phase, if whatever you call that. It's not really a well-defined phase to be in. I've got the Hajayan Contact D channel on YouTube, and I do a podcast that we've called the Voices of Orion Project. And what I do is I interview people like myself, other experiencers. I network with other experiencers, and I do my own videos. And I have a part-time podcast partner who just recently joined me, who was my psychic mentor, who helped me get through this. So just wanted to say hello to everybody. It's great to be here. And I guess we'll just get started. The best way to describe this, there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to try to stay on. I need to try to stay focused here. Okay, I am a person who spent most of his life having psychic experiences that I couldn't control. I never once even thought that I was an abductee, and that's something that happens to a lot of us. Most people who are abduction victims don't even realize it. And, we'll have peculiar things. We may have some psychic experiences, and we'll have strange dreams and so forth, but sometimes we may find marks on ourselves. I've never had any marks on myself that I couldn't identify or explain away. So I never had that, but it doesn't mean that you're not an abduction victim. What I did have, though, is intermittent telepathic contact, different points in my life, which when I got to, I think it was 2005 to 2006, that's when things really started to take off, unfortunately for me. So I guess we'll just get to the early part of this, and I'll just explain something. I'm sure everybody listening to this has been paying attention and realized that there appears to be an intuitive awakening taking place across the planet. It's not just that we've got the internet and then we have access to information 24/7 now. Even though they censor it, we can still get it. And for a long time, for a good 20 years, there was virtually no censorship on the internet in most Western countries. So you can explain away the awakening by that, but there's much more to it because, as anybody who's been in, lobbying, politics, any type of grassroots activism knows that talking to people about government corruption and different subjects, you can get people are pretty well brainwashed. And even though the information is accessible, they just can't seem to adequately process it and to accept it as facts, even if it's very well validated. So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Well, something has taken place in the past 20 years. There's been a collective cognitive shift that is taking place within the population. Of course, you have people that are not going to wake up, which are still probably just under the majority now, but they're not there. I don't know what the percentage would be. If I had to estimate, maybe 40 or 50% are still kind of mostly asleep, but they're waking up. Of course, there's going to be a segment that won't. Now, looking at this a little closer, you'll see that there's a phenomena taking place within what people call the starseed community or the experiencer community. That's much, much more intensified than what you're seeing in the general population. So there's a multi-tiered awakening taking place. So the people at the top level will, identify as being starseeds or people that, are just sensitive to the topic. They may have a connection to it, but they don't know what it is. So those are the people who are really waking up. And the purpose of this is to be agents of change, because there's a paradigm shift that's happening right now. And the problem is that, if you look at the way our reality is set up, what you'll see is you'll see that if you're really tuned in, you'll know that that animals, for example, are much more psychic than human beings. They can see spirits. There's evidence of that. They can sense earthquakes. There's videos. If you look hard enough and do enough research, I've seen it, but there's not a lot on it. But zoo animals have been observed on camera huddling together about an hour before an earthquake. So, they can sense these things, but at the same time, the most advanced species on the planet literally has no psychic abilities. And there are people that do. And the ones that really do are the ones that they're heavily targeted by the government, or they attempt to recruit them and use them. And you can find this on, declassified CIA documents. There's one, I think it's called A Magician Walks into a Lab. It's an interesting read if you happen to find it on CIA.gov. And that talks about real psychic abilities validated in a lab. But what's really going on here is that you've got an influx of very special souls coming into this planet as agents of change under an occupation by negative extraterrestrials. It's mostly reptilian, but there are plenty of assisting races involved in this. It's what you call a quantum quarantine. I refer to it as the AI, actually is the transdimensional AI planetary consciousness simulation. And when I started talking about this some years ago, it was back probably 2016, 2017. But prior to that, when I was talking about just corruption and cover-ups and things like that, going back 20 years on the internet, is a good example, is that I was one of the few and only people talking about it back then. And, unfortunately, all of those posts are gone because YouTube scrubs everything. So, but I would leave comments, and I started getting a following that way. I had over 100 subscribers just because I was leaving really information-packed, educational, provocative comments about government corruption and alien UFO cover-ups and stuff like that, because I was always into those subjects since about age 14. So anyway, I was just using that as an example of how the world is waking up, but there's a pushback against this by the extraterrestrials, and that's what we're going to get into tonight. We're going to talk about what's been done to me and what's being done to other people and why. And there's a program called Project Ibis. This program's been outed by people, within the super soldier community. It's a MILAB abduction program. It's multifaceted. It's bigger than most people conceive of. It's not just about super soldiers. What it generally is, it's an umbrella program that targets psychic children coming into this world. and they want to abduct these people and hijack them. If they're not already hijacked, what they do is they hijack you from lifetime to lifetime. And this is why abductions run in families often. And it's also why people who have these abductions often will have past life memories of being in temples, of being used in religious ceremonies and things like that, because it's all connected to a very ancient program. Project Ibis is just a new variation of what has always been done for a very long time on this planet. The only difference is that this time the United States military, various pieces or parts of intelligence agencies, from the Defense Intelligence Agency all the way down, are involved in it, and other militaries of other countries that have treaties with these negative ETs are also involved in it. So it's a multinational conspiracy. Really, it's a multinational intergalactic conspiracy, if you're cosmic level conspiracy, if you like to call that, or also spiritual as well. So just laying that out a little bit, I'm gonna now kind of move into how this all really started for me, at least in this lifetime. When I was a kid growing up, I had a lot of nightmares and night frights, and of course, you can write those off as just an imagination. But there was one particular memory that I had to come to grips with just in the past year, which is when my real recovery started. And I was 6 years old, was riding a bike. I got it for Christmas. It was the fall of 1980. I got it around Christmas. So I've been riding throughout the spring and the summer with it. And I still have my training wheels on. And my grandparents, because they raised me, down the street from their house is a park, and it has a wooded path. There's a concession stand. There's some fields, and there's an asphalt. It's a nature trail that goes through this strip of woods that separates the park and the neighborhood. And at 6, I wasn't supposed to go all the way down to the park, even though only had to cross one street, and it was pretty safe. But I pushed the envelope and I kept going down. Eventually, they kind of eased up, and I was going down the park. So I'd spent half the day there riding back and forth to the house, and it was getting late. It was probably an hour or two before sunset, I guess, and it was time for me to go home and eat. And so I was on my way home, and I decided to go through the wooded part of it instead of the shortcut, which was over the hill by the concession stand, and it comes out the bottom of my street. So I was going the long way just to make the most of it. And as I got into the woods, I started getting a lot of fear and anxiety, like there was something coming up. And at the time, I didn't realize what I was going through, because you really don't. I used to have these night frights when I was a child, and and when the abductions would start, they would always start with a lot of fear, and then normally after that, paralysis. But they were so good with the screen memories that you wouldn't remember. But sometimes they would either give you something like a clue, or they would make a mistake. And I think it was really just clues that they were giving me. And this has to do with the awakening process, because there's a reason why we're all waking up, and I'll get into that later. But they know that I was going to be waking up, just like they know that all these other people were going to be waking up. And this is 1970s, actually 1980. So, things were barely getting started with this whole story that was coming out about, UFOs. We heard about Roswell and stuff, but, none of the super soldier stuff, none of these programs were being talked about. You heard about abductions, but that was really it. There's very little really about it, and very little was known. So, but it would always be this fear. And so I get a little further in the woods, and I start to round the corner. And what I was afraid of is there was going to be teenagers from the neighborhood, and they would pick on you because you're young and stuff, So I didn't want to make eye contact. And I could sense that I was going to run into them. It was weird because this was all happening so quick. We're only talking about, less than a minute here, because it wasn't that far. It was maybe 100 yards from when I started to feel to when I actually saw this. So I get around the corner, and I noticed that up on my left-hand side, there's a clearing, and there was a rope swing there and a fort that was built. I don't know if the fort was there at that point, but the clearing was there, and there was a fallen tree. So there's an asphalt trail that I'm riding on with a bike, a fallen tree, and 7 people standing around this tree. And I know that it was 7 because later I remembered more of this, because it was all I had for years was a screen memory. So as I'm riding by them, I'm trying not to make contact. So I'm looking out through my peripheral view, and I see that they're all wearing dark navy blue. They've all got the same kind of pullover top on with a hood. All their hoods are up. They've got the same navy blue pants on. Remember them kind of being a little bit like high water pants. They were a little bit, they weren't like all the way down to the shoe level. They were like cut high. And all of them were the same height and the same thin build. I mean, it was very unusual looking, which is why I couldn't maintain, the viewpoint that I had. I had to turn my head and look at them. And what I noticed was, before I turned my head, is they looked like they had masks on with the hoods over it, and it looked like maybe a ski mask. Later on, it seemed to look like a luchador wrestling mask when I remembered back, but I didn't know what that was at 6. And so I see this, and then when I finally get parallel with him, I turn around and I look, and the one that was by the tree that actually took a step forward, he took a big long step. He leaned backward and extended, almost like that Nazi march, where you extend the leg all the way out. And he took a really long step, and then he stopped. And at that point I looked at him, and he didn't turn completely, he or it didn't turn completely at me, but I saw half the face. And what I saw was it looked like a mask, and it looked like they all had masks on, but this one had a very large almond-shaped eye, and it was surrounded by a type of an outline, like a stitched in kind of like strip of fabric that went around the eye to accent it. So, but it was really big, it was dark, and it didn't look normal at all. As soon as I saw that, I got gripped in fear. The fear was building up, but as soon as I saw that, I got that fear that shoots through your gut like a shock wave, like an electric jolt. And it hit me. And as soon as it hit me, I felt energy hit me in the back of the head. And it had a viscous feel to it. It flowed. So it wasn't just like a jolt of electricity where it just like it's a rapid movement. It was kind of a viscous feel. It hit me in the back of the head, and I felt it travel down my spine all the way down to my tailbone. All I remember for years was pedaling out of there as fast as I possibly could, stopping about halfway up my street, getting my breath, and then getting back and just starting again, and then riding out of there as quickly as I could. It wasn't until years later, which was actually in this past year, after I did a hypnosis session, because there wasn't anything I could get from the hypnosis session from that particular memory or that event. But what I remembered afterward, because I had these flashes of memory, is that I actually, when I got zapped by whatever that energy was, I came to a stop, and I stood up, and I was straddling the bike, and my arms were beside me, and I became very relaxed. I lost all the fear. That was like instant, like turning off a switch. I felt really comfortable, like I was wrapped in like a comforter, like a child wrapped in a blanket and just being held. I floated off the bicycle, and the bike floated with me. We kind of like separated and floated together. And I just remember going up through the trees, and everything turned to like a light blue color. And then I lost consciousness. The next memory fragment that I had after that, I was floating back in, following the asphalt trail to right where I was picked up at to start with. And I was floating in, and then just kind of like coming to a landing with the bicycle. And as I was coming in, I looked to my left, and I could see 7 tall grays, but they didn't have gray skin. They had chalk white skin, really large heads, robotic, like no facial movement. It was just a little ridge for a nose and a little hole slit for a mouth, and really large eyes. And they still had the hoods on, but now I could see their faces. There were no masks or anything obscuring it. And they had their arms outstretched, and they were standing in a circle. It was like Stonehenge, how you have the vertical pillars, and then you have the top, which is before it fell apart, you had basically like a flat circular area that went around the top that made it one complete unit. Well, they had their arms outstretched like a Stonehenge configuration. And there was a light above them, like they were going to be levitated upward, or they were going through, or maybe they were being teleported. I don't know. I don't have any recollections of the craft. What's interesting is that a really close friend of mine who helped me, who came into my life to help me with all of this at a subconscious level, which later became something more to it. We had a past life connection. She received several downloads, psychic downloads, and where she had seen bits and pieces of what happened to me after they took me. And it's, I can't really get into that in too much detail because I don't remember specifics. She would have to do that, but she did remember saying that they took a wand, some type of a wand, and put it to my forehead and were able to read my whole soul history, whatever, some kind of tool they were using. Other than that, I don't know anything else that happened to me. So that was the first abduction. I've had other events like this where my bed would start shaking at night. After I felt the presence, I'd get that same fear sensation. But every time before whatever it was that would come to get me, I wouldn't remember anything. It would be covered over by a screen memory. And so I had a lot of night frights like that. And I had something that I was afraid of called the seagull, which I associated with having a white face because seagulls have a white face. And I also associated it with, and it's odd because I remember having this really bad nightmare that I finally saw the seagull, but it was it was actually the dog from the Wizard of Oz, which was odd because later on in this past year, I had talked to a person that I had mentioned to you before when we were off the air about possibly being a guest. I can, and he mentions being in the Montauk projects and stuff. And they did use the Wizard of Oz in the mind control, along with other things too. There was a variety of different programs, but the Wizard of Oz was one of them. And the Wizard of Oz was interesting because later, when I was in my contactee phase, I was told that the Wizard of Oz was actually something that was engineered into the psyches of the people that created the movie and created the story, and that I was shown how they did that, as well as the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was explained to me in a download in about an instant how they were manipulating human creativity in Hollywood and other areas to socially engineer the population. And the metaphor for the Wizard of Oz was the starseed experience, where you have the path of enlightenment as the yellow brick road, and you have the negative and the positive, the witches after you, and then you have the three characters which represent aspects of humanity, and they're all trying to improve their situation. And the starseed, which is the main character, is trying to go home with the magic slippers and stuff. So, but yeah, so that pretty much was that. Now, later in life, what was going on with me is I was having relatively infrequent, I would say infrequent, but they were relatively regular. It's just there was no set pattern to it. I would have psychic experiences. And, it could be anything from just hearing somebody's thoughts to having a lucid dream to an out-of-body experience, things like that. So I don't want to really get into a lot of those because we could talk all night about them. But that was pretty much my life up until, I would say, up until about 2003. That's when things really started to take off for me. I'd had a violent allergic reaction to the allergy drug Singulair. I was hospitalized off and on. And over the course of about a week, they finally kept me and ran tests. And just that's when they said I had this reaction to the drug. And on the last day that I got ready to leave, I was able to finally take a shower, and my wife was there, and we were I got a shower, and I came out of it, and I'm standing in front of the nurse's station up against a wall, and there's a room to my right, and it was an old man in there, and he was covered in these lesions, and he looked really, really, was really sick, and I just happened to glance into the room, and he said, "Help me." And at that moment that he said that, I felt his pain. I had a very powerful psychic empathic experience which brought me to tears. And I had to go to my hospital room and just kind of let it out before my wife came in with the towels and everything, because she was in there cleaning up after me, because I literally couldn't move my hands. That's what it did to me. All my muscles locked up, and I didn't have control over my hands still. It was like having all thumbs. And so I needed help in the shower. So from that point forward, I had a series for about 3 weeks. I had a series of unusual experiences, mostly with strangers. Got to the point where I was confronting people about how they were feeling without them showing me anything. They didn't even talk to me. They would have, there was no indication there was a problem, but I could sense it. And the odd thing is that they didn't confront me as to how I knew. They just kind of picked up, like they had already told me about what was going on, and like we already had established that. It was a bizarre sort of interaction that I would have with them, with a very unnatural context to it. And this went on for about 3 weeks, and then it stopped just like that, just as quickly as it started. And I had thought that it was maybe a product or symptom, side effect of the drug, like it did something to my brain, because I had a very high fever. It was like 104, 105. And I had it a couple of times. They would break my fever and then let me go, so out of the ER. But as it turns out, it was much, much more than that, because what was going on with me is that, and I didn't realize this, I was completely oblivious to this up until this past, almost a year ago, about 11 months ago. It was the first week of September of last year when all this really came out. Up to that point, I was what you would call a diluted starseed / contactee. And we're going to get into that next. So what pretty much was going on is that I was in a military program as a MILAB victim, which is military abductions, or military abduction victim. And they were doing their best to make sure that the awakening that they couldn't stop would be engineered in such a way that it would be non-threatening to their agenda. Which is what they're trying to do with just about everybody. But I was kind of a high-profile case. And so what sort of happened next is that right after I got out of the hospital from having that reaction, and this is where things really started to heat up, and this is where people should be starting to take notice, because we're going to get into something that I call virtual temple complexes. And these are programs that are being run as part of a joint Draco ET. U.S. and other militaries are involved in this, but it's an offensive operation to preserve the continuity of government. And so what happened is around 2003, after I got out of the hospital, I had a psychic download. And, at this point, I've been kind of primed for this stuff, because I've had experiences. So this wasn't like something that, like a fish out of water type experience. When I had the download and I was told to do something, it was like instant. I knew that I had to do it. I didn't know who it was, but I knew it was whoever it was that had been doing this to me prior. And when I was younger, growing up a lot, I'd have music on, I'd be doing my homework, and I would hear a loud crack at the door frame in my bedroom, and a presence would come in the room, and I could sense this presence circle around me. And it would happen almost every night, and I got used to it. At first, it was like a little freaky, but after a while, I started to associate it with something that was there to protect or help me, which was completely false. That's kind of like the what do they call that syndrome of the Nazis? The Stockholm syndrome, I guess, but it was at a subconscious level at this point. So, I didn't think anything bad was happening, but it was. And so I was told that I needed to find people like myself, and that they were on the internet. This was the message that I got in the psychic download. So I took this very seriously, and I immediately went to searching. For 2 years, I looked, and I went through all sorts of different, social media groups and things. And this was 2003 to 2005. So there was a lot less out there at that point. We didn't have the technology that we have now. There wasn't really video chats back then. It was just, there wasn't even too many voicemails either. It was mainly text, the instant messaging and stuff. So, anyway, I looked for 2 years, and I joined a couple of groups on empaths and things, and I couldn't get anybody to help me or even relate to me. And I also have this past life memory that I'll get into in a moment, which I've had since basically since the start. I really can't tell you or pinpoint when I got the memory, but back in my late teens, I started getting flashbacks that filled in the blanks, and this parts that I had forgotten had been restored and new stuff added, and a greater clarity was what I was possessing at that point. So anyway, I started looking on the internet, and I started searching, and took about 2 years. I looked everywhere. The one place I kept avoiding was the occult and Satanism and stuff. And, I didn't want to get into that because I knew it was bad. And obviously there's a bad stigma attached to it, and rightfully so. So, as time went by, I looked everywhere and I wasn't getting anywhere. And I kept getting subconsciously pushed. This is what I call subconscious psychic programming. And there's also something I labeled subconscious psychic networking, which comes into play when two people who've been subconsciously programmed to do something come together. They're then given a task. This is done by the positive side as well as the negative side. It's something that's done often in these programs, which we're going to really get into in a moment. So I found myself going to this one particular website because I looked up Satanism. It was like, I remember the nights really clearly because it was a night where I decided, I'm going to look in a place I never looked before, just to cover every base here. I came across a website called The Joy of Satan. It was one of the first couple of searches that I found when I looked up Satanism. And I just kept coming across the name and I passed over it. It was like this big oxymoron crying out to me, like, look at me. So to make a long story short, I went to this website. I started to read it, and I realized that it really wasn't about Satanism. It was actually a Sumerian Enki cult with the Zechariah Sitchin material, the clay tablets and stuff, the Anunnaki. At that point, I had never heard of it. I'd never heard of the Anunnaki at all, even though I'd been researching UFOs and ghosts and psychic abilities and everything, there was never any mention of the Anunnaki in any of the UFO magazines that I'd read for years, or any of the books that I'd ordered out of those magazines from Interlight Publishing, or any of the other stuff I'd read. So I really was pulled into this. And there's a reason for that. It's because the Anunnaki story is utilized in these virtual temple complex scenarios. It's also used to basically deceive the masses, because the ETs use this as a recruitment tool. This is a stepping off or a transitional belief system that gets the targeted audience, the targeted population that they're going after, the star seeds mainly. It gets them off of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, or whatever their personal beliefs were prior to any of this. A lot of them would go through an atheist phase, which I also went through, but I can never really become an atheist because I always consider myself as a spiritual atheist, because I was having psychic experiences. I knew there was life after death. I had experiences with people who died, and I had a past life memory. So I couldn't embrace atheism as it was, but I looked at it just said I'm atheistic or non-theistic. So that's how I looked at myself. So, and that was something that I found that was a common thing with the people that I met in that particular cult. And when I found out what this cult was, it was being run by the Dracos in the U.S. military. It was actually in our program called Project Ibis, and this is something I actually had memory recall of about probably, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. I'm not exactly sure, but I remember just remembering it. And I never heard of Project Ibis, and I looked it up, and first thing I found was the James Casbolt stuff on Project Camelot's website. And it wasn't resonating with me until I got deeper into it and then started to remember more. But just to put that on the side right now, what I want to talk about is this past life memory. And I associated this with being in heaven, because I was in what appeared to be or felt like a room. It was covered in a white haze. I couldn't see any of the objects around me. It was like, in the beginning, the memory felt like it was supposed to be like in heaven, because, all the depictions of heaven on TV that I've ever seen when I was a kid, you're in a cloudy, misty area. There's clouds. It's white. It's bright white light. I heard about near-death experiences, the bright light. I associated this with some sort of heavenly realm, and the beings that I was there with were possibly angels. But, and what really sold that to me was because we were communicating telepathically. I never opened my mouth during that whole discussion that we had. So this is what happened. I'm in this room. I find myself in this room, and this is the original version. It's white. I can't see much of anything. There's three people. One's a woman. I don't know what the gender is of the second one, but I know there's a male. And the male is standing in this room, which I couldn't make out what it was, up against the wall. And they were asking me questions telepathically. And I was protesting, essentially. I'm going to make this short. Then I'm going to get to the revised version of it, which came from hypnosis, partially from hypnosis, and then for more memory recall that the hypnosis actually, triggered afterward. So they asked me what race I wanted to be. I had two choices, white and black. It was really weird because I was speaking in English, thinking to myself, what is that? I mean, okay, why am I speaking in English? I don't know. Why would they be speaking English at all in this heavenly realm? The other thing, too, that was odd about it is that when I looked at these beings, they looked human, but I couldn't see their faces. They had literally had black rectangles and black boxes, squares over their mouth and eyes, or their entire face was shaded, but you could see their hair. And I couldn't tell the skin color. Whoever, and what I knew is that this was edited. Somebody got into this and changed my memory. I thought that maybe because I was speaking in English, that they had done that as well. Or maybe that's the nature of telepathy, that no matter what language you speak, it instantly translates it into your own personal thoughts. That's true to some extent, but that wasn't what was going on here. So, fast forwarding to the real memory, what really took place is, and this came about, and I don't want to bring up the person's name because there's an issue, but I had a hypnosis session with someone who's prominent in the super soldier community. And there wasn't a lot that came out, but what did come out is that it unlocked some very important information within me. It was an epiphany moment because I realized that I wasn't in heaven and that I was in a medical setting. And I knew that prior to the hypnosis, that it was a medical setting, because I asked a lot of questions during the ET because I had a contactee phase that went on for about 15 years, from about 2006 all the way up until the spring of last year, spring and summer of last year before it ended. So I was officially a contactee, Galactic Federation, all that stuff. So anyway, I'm in this lab, and now I can see it clear because I was able to clearly access it in total 20/20 vision in my hypnosis session. So what it was a room in an underground base. The base is the White Sands, New Mexico, deep underground base. If you go to if you look at the satellite pictures and you look up White Sands, if you look up White Sands Missile Test Range, what you're going to see is you're going to see a large area that's surrounded by two mountain ranges. There's one on the east side, there's one on the west side. And on the other side of the western side of the mountains, there's a city. It's a pretty large city, and that's where a lot of the people who work at the base live. And they also work otherwhere. I mean, for the most part, that town, I think, probably got its start, and I don't remember the names. There's a couple of different names, but it's a pretty big area. It probably got its start because of the base itself, but there's a visitor center there. And on the west side of the base, where the visitor center is, there's the mountains. That's where the underground facility is. It isn't directly under the missile test range because that's a big valley area. And, if you're going to have a base, you don't want to put it underneath where they're going to be setting off explosives. So it's under the thicker part of the strata, or the earth. It's under the mountain range, and it separates that city that I'm talking about to the base. And I've done an interview or two where we showed the pictures of it. I got it off of Google Earth, and I was able to recall where it was and put a circle around it and show people and stuff. And was also able to get into some other stuff, which I'll talk about in a moment. But that's where this memory took place at. It was, and I also remember the program was Project Alpha, but this was a different aspect of it. Project Alpha, you've interviewed some people in the super soldier community in the past year. I don't know if they brought up Project Alpha. Were they mentioning it all to you, Brandon?
No, I hadn't heard much about that.
Okay, Project Alpha deals with the creation of super soldiers, genetic engineering, soul fracturing. We're talking very high tech stuff here. So there's also a program called Project Surrogate. Project Surrogate deals with creating placeholders in society, as also deals with social engineering by the negative ET presence. What happened was is that I have this memory of the base that I've had this whole time, but it looked like in a heavenly realm. At this point now, it's not heavenly at all. I'm standing in a room. The cabinets are from the 70s. This was 1973 when this took place. The cabinets were the type of pressed wood cabinets that didn't have like not like a formica, but almost like it's like a vinyl adhesive with a fake wood coloring on it, like a fake wood grain is what these cabinets were. They were very generic. So it was pressed wood cabinets with that thin kind of vinyl fake wood finish on it. And they're all against the wall in like a row. And then below that, there was a desk that was a shelf that mounted into the wall. It probably was adjustable for height. Do it because, I'm assuming that because these ETs were 8 feet tall that were in this lab. And I'll explain how I know that in a moment. But so I'm standing in a slab. Right to my left is this big machine that looks like somewhat like an MRI machine due to the color of the plastic housing, or what looks like plastic. It's big. It's about 8 feet, 8 feet tall. It's has a square base to it. It's round at the top, flat on the sides, but it's like I said, it's like a rounded at the top, like a horseshoe, but with straight sides. And it has a platform, which is a bed that protrudes out of it. And over top of the bed, there's a hinge. It's a dome type thing that fits down over top of you when you lay on the bed. It's hinged from the back. Your head is facing the machine itself. Your feet are facing away from it. So you're laying with your feet. So you're actually looking at your feet when you're laying in this thing. And it has a glass dome, or what appears to be glass, very, very clear, no fingerprints. It's just whatever it is, it's very high tech. You lay in it, it comes, the lid shuts down over top of you. So what was going on is the first thing that happened to me is I'm in the lab. The male is standing across the room from me. He's at the computer terminal, which is built into the wall. There's a row of cabinets above. There's like a shelf desk to the right of it. And he's talking to me telepathically. And he said to me, what race do you want to be? And I don't remember the specific order of what was said. So I'm just going to throw it out there, however I can remember it now. But he asked me, what race do you want to be? And he says, white or black. And I said, well, I'm aware of the racial tension that's going on in society. So I'd rather be white. And then I made a joke, which fell completely flat. I said, I like white skin anyway. And I meant it in such a way that it was like changing clothing. Like, okay, this is a life assignment. That's what I'm going to do. And this is what really threw me off because, I thought I was lied to in my contactee phase. I was told that I was in an engineered lifetime for therapeutic purposes. And then what they explained to me is there's a program of soul seeding that the ETs do. The Dracos actually sell or trade positions for other people, members of other races, including their own, to come here and incarnate in a human body in an engineered therapeutic lifetime, where they're put under a state of amnesia and a mind wipe, just like the rest of us. But when they leave, they're put back under a state of amnesia, and they remember who they were prior to coming here, but then they get the lifetime in phases, much like when you're recovering something from amnesia or you're recovering past lifetimes. It's given to you back in phases with psychotherapy. This is what they were telling me. So they were revealing another aspect of one of the ET programs that it's being used to exploit humanity, which involves ET soul seeding and engineered therapeutic lifetimes. So that's what I thought it was. And that's why, it sounded like, everything kind of fit in that framework. So he asked me what race I want to be. I made the joke, it went flat. And then I was complaining because I had a lot of anxiety in this lab. I was a bit angry because I had been promised something and I didn't remember what it was until later on. And this is, all these years later, I finally got what it was. That's when I was after the hypnosis session. It didn't happen in the hypnosis session, but it came afterward. The hypnosis session was like the crack that broke open the dam for me, because once that happened, I was able to shed the programming that was holding things up. It led to a 2-month depression afterward, but it allowed me to remember things and be able to accept them. And that was the biggest part of it, is like, how much can I take? Because your psyche becomes fragile, and it's your subconscious or your higher self that protects you. So here I am in this lab. I've made the decision and make me white, so I have it easier in society due to racism and everything else that was going on in the 70s. And now I'm protesting because I'm sensing that they're going to make me physically handicapped in some way. I'm worried about this because I know that there's other people that I know that are friends that have been put in this situation. And I remember this one young man, and I didn't know who he was until this past year, that, he was a really close friend. And I remember, and I was thinking of him. And when you're not under the influence of this augmented reality, like we're dealing with right now, and you have your psychic abilities, it's like a computer connecting to a network. You can see things in total clarity in your mind. You're not just accessing your own memory, but you can get past that and have a photographic memory that accesses everything, because you're connecting to the mind of God. Literally, you're connecting to the collective subconscious that connects all of us, that's responsible for our reality and existence. And that's what you tap in when you do remote viewing. And those people, what they do is they sensitize themselves to the weak signal, which is due to the simulation technology that we're under the influence of. So I'm seeing this young man as he was. He looked Polynesian or Asian. He had not dark brown skin, but kind of in between, not light, not dark, but somewhere in between there. He could have passed for an Indian or somebody from Polynesia. And I remember he had short black hair, and he was a really close friend of mine. And we were really, really close, more closer than friends. I'm going to say, but it was a very close connection. And I remember that, he had to come here and do the same thing. And then he was put in a lifetime, and I could see him as he was at that very moment, because I remembered him. And then I went and I remote viewed him in total clarity. He was in a wheelchair. He was badly deformed, was physically deformed, not so much in the face, but, his arms, it was a lot like Stephen Hawking. That's how bad off he was. He may have been blind. I don't remember, but I know that I was having a lot of anxiety. Being blind was my biggest fear. And, so I remote viewed him, and I was thinking to myself, and I just kept saying, that's not going to work. That's just not going to work. And that's when the female came up to me and looked me right in the face, and I couldn't see her face because it was all these black boxes over it. And she said very firmly and forcefully, with authority and heartless, and very heartless, just cold, she said, "You have to take a handicap." And I looked at her, and I said, then I looked at the floor, and I just said to myself and her and everybody in the room, because we were hearing each other's thoughts, I guess I'll figure it. Well, actually, what I said is that she goes, "You have to take a handicap." And I've kind of fucked this up. Sorry. What happened is that she told me that I was going to have a speech impairment. And I said, "That's not going to work." And I kept just saying that phrase over and over. "That's not going to work." And that's when she said, "You've got to take a handicap." And then I looked at the floor, and I thought to myself, I guess I'll figure it out when I get there. At this point, I was told to get into this machine. So I laid in it. Like I said, my head was at the end where the main part of the machine was, like an MRI, and a glass enclosure came down over top of me and shut. And I laid in there, and now they're to my left where I was previously standing, and there's 3 of them standing there. I can't make them out, even though the glass is clear, because they've obscured the way they look. And I'm also piecing this together because I can see it clearly from the hypnosis session, but I can't see it clearly in the memory. So I'm kind of putting those together to form what I'm saying here, to describe it. They said something to me telepathically as a group, but I don't remember what it was. That was edited out. And I remember laying there and then just relaxing for a moment. And then the entire chamber that I was laying in, filled up full of a bright white light, at which point I could see a fetus at the 12th week after conception, the end of the first trimester. And I know that because when I took my first day of anatomy physiology class in community college, I went into my textbook and looked up that section while my professor was talking about the course. And it was exactly what I remembered seeing, the exact phase of development. And what I was told was later is that when they put someone when they implant a soul in a body, in a human body, it has to be done no later than the 12th week of conception. The reason is because if the brain activity is allowed to begin, it creates a soul that creates a memory of self. So the being, the life form, now becomes self-aware, at which point they become a memory of God or the creator, and therefore they are eternal in the mind of the creator. So, and I have a saying that I came up with. I said, it goes like this. It's reality is God's dream, and we are nothing but thoughts in a never-ending story. So at that point, that's when it ended. I went into a dream state. That's all I remember, just kind of like falling asleep, and the image fades away. And that's the end of this memory. What I didn't know is, like I said, is that this was in a military base. So when I had my hypnosis session, I was told to go into this room after we failed to get anything from my abduction memory. And I went into the room and I saw the room, and I was told to get into the machine, the soul transference machine, at which point I realized that I actually had tactical body armor on. And these were clues being shed or actually revealed to me by my subconscious or higher self. And so I see tactical body armor on. That indicates to me that I was in a military program. It was very much identical to what the Halo video games are, depicted as having for their super soldiers. And that's because they've been copying testimony from people going back close to 20 years who have been recounting these things and doing artist renderings of it. And that's what they modeled all the graphics and stuff off in these video games, which has these space battles and so forth. It's often a way for debunkers to point and say, you're just copying the video games. That's where you're getting your ideas from. But, I never saw any, never played video games except for Atari and that kind of thing when I was a kid. I'm not that of the age that would be interested in it. And I never knew what even Halo was at that point and throughout my life. So, and the only thing I had heard about it prior to that is I had asked a person who was doing a hypnosis session about it, and they said they've been copying my work. So I saw the tactical body armor. When I got in the machine in the hypnosis session, another clue came from my subconscious. I could see that I was in a hospital gown. I had those little slip-on, napkins that go over your shoes. It's like a napkin kind of shoe covering. It's made out of like a napkin material with elastic. I had those on. So it was clearly a medical setting. This was a medical procedure, and I was in a base. I was told to exit this room, and under hypnosis, that's when I stepped into a military base that I had had dreams about for 20 years. This was White Sands, and I'll tell you how I know that in a minute. But it was a base that I had dreams of repetitively for 20 years. They were very lucid. I was very aware. I could probe the dream a good bit. And I was just walking around the base in every one of these dreams. I would find entrances to the base in obscure places. There were elevator shafts, stairwells, doorways at the bottom of stairs, doorways that would open up after the elevator would drop you off someplace. And it was just weird shit like that. It was just, I would go through a hatch in the floor and go down a spiral ladder, and I'd come to a doorway and I'd be in this base. And it was one of the dreams. I actually was in a cave system, a cavern, and I walked down a trunk passage and came to the very end of it. And there was a security camera on the wall facing a very, very new painted metal door. And I entered the door, and I was in a very advanced, very new looking base. And, since then, I've had a memory come through in my recovery phase where I actually saw I was actually laying on a gurney being rolled down a giant hallway with two people in white lab coats pulling the gurney, and I'm laying there, laying flat on my back. I feel like I'm a child. I open my eyes up, and as I was regaining consciousness, and I was covered in some kind of covering, it felt like a membrane or like a very tight sheet, but it felt plastic like. And it was as if it was there. If I were to regain consciousness and control over my body and try to move and struggle, I'd be tied down by this membrane on the gurney until they got me to where I was going. And I was looking out through a triangular slit that was over, the opening was over my mouth. So it was a wide end of the triangle was over my eyes, and then it narrowed down to my mouth so I could breathe and see just a little bit. And I was looking up through between both of their shoulders, up in the ceiling, in the dreams and in the memories, the White Sands base. It's big, huge hallways. They vary in height and they vary in width. The biggest of them that I remember, you could park two semi trucks side by side and then stack another two on top of those. In the ceilings, they had a metal grid work like you'd see in a shopping mall, a restaurant, where they have the exposed ceiling infrastructure up there, and it's just like an erector set thing, and it's got like, it's got all the different utility wiring and everything else is up there. In the White Sands base, the ceilings are like that. The color is like a dark brown color. They painted the metal a dark brown color to a dark terracotta. And I just remember there was portions of the base where the hallways would get small. The one that went to the cavern it got pretty small, and then there was a door to the left, and then another door to the right at the very end of it, and there'd be like a smooth engineered surface, and then it would be a natural rock wall, like as an aesthetic relief in different places. I remember at least one passage or hallway like that. I had another, and now the thing is, when you have these dreams coming in, you don't know where your your imagination picks up and the memory ends, but it appears as if your handlers, the ETs, the military is putting this into you and engineering these dreams to give you bits and pieces of things. And looking back in retrospect, they were creating a false awakening for me, an engineered false awakening so they can maintain control. And the longer it went on, the more I resisted, and the more what they were doing to me failed, at which point they became more and more physically and psychologically and emotionally aggressive. So now that I've covered that, I'm going to go back to this cult experience that I had. This was pretty bizarre because what they were doing is that they literally, the U.S. military and this program, Project Ibis, and these ETs were creating something that I call virtual temple complexes. And what these virtual temple complexes do is they're there as an offensive operation to create a false awakening. They can vary from anything from a new age type of group, or just a YouTube channel, or even a community forum, all the way to a very, very well put together cult with its own theology, its own belief system. And that's what this Joy of Satan thing was. It was an Enki cult that used Satanism as psychological camouflage to hide itself. So when you point out that, hey, there's people having real experiences with pagan gods, and you bring up what's a satanic cult, it's like, it's game over. We're not going to talk about it. The UFO researchers don't want to talk about it. There's only a fringe that would actually even entertain it. And then everybody else hears it and, oh, it's demons. See, it's all demons. So, it's just kind of like, it's a way of sweeping it under the proverbial rug. I got involved with this cult. I was recruited by the group's creator, who was a MILAB victim herself. Her name's Andrea Harrington. She's married to Cliff Harrington, who is one of the top tier members of a very small ragtag American Nazi party out of Oklahoma, which I wasn't even aware of and I wouldn't have associated with, but I was being mind controlled. So this wasn't even an aspect of what I was experiencing, but that's just to give her background. And so she was tasked with setting up this cult, and she was having experiences with this being called Ea or Enki, who also went by Satan, because the theology is basically is that the old pagan gods had returned to save humanity, to give them their psychic their psychic abilities back, to give them equality in the cosmos, and to liberate them from these angels who were harvesting souls and creating this thought form of a god that they were feeding this energy into, basically like the reverse story of Loosh. I'm sure you've heard of that, where they harvest negative energy, human suffering. And the physical component of that is supposed to be the adrenochrome harvesting that's supposed to be taking place in these underground facilities. So let me get something to drink here. So anyway, I get involved with this cult. The first thing that takes place is I'm sending this email to the cult leader. And this is the first time, by the way, that anybody who's listened to my story from, that I had this past life memory. That's what I sent her, that story as I remembered it, the first version. It was in a cloudy white haze and so forth. Didn't know anything about it being in the military or anything like that. So she immediately was, at a subconscious level, this is the subconscious psychic networking taking place. So she was immediately taking a lot of time with me, and nobody ever had. And we exchanged several emails, quite long ones, over the course of a few weeks. And I remember her telling me, she goes, the reason why you're having these experiences, your chakras are open. She said, you've been with Satan before, which is Enki, Ea, and all that. And what was interesting about it really is, if you peel away all the theology and the BS of it, it's really just, what they were doing is they were putting this out there and having this woman create this cult, this virtual temple complex. And there's many of them, by the way. This is just one of the worst, one of the most destructive to the people who get involved with it. And they were subconsciously programming the MILABs to go in there. Now, of course, there's other people that come in there too that aren't MILABs, but they may have some psychic abilities. And this goes with any one of these groups out there. Anyone, if you get involved in any of this stuff, you're putting yourself in danger, especially with the new age, because it seems like it's benevolent. It seems like it's the modern version of Christianity, or it's like it's the liberating version of it. You get to have godlike powers and meditate and do all these things, and you're having these, and you get these spirit guides. You'd have to ask yourself, who in the hell are spirit guides? So they're extraterrestrials, or just spiritual beings whose only purpose is to help somebody win a poker game, or to help somebody bet on a horse, or to give them advice with their girlfriend or their boyfriend in a relationship. What job should I take? It's really come down to this. It's really absurd if you think about it. Why would anybody want to be just basically a servant to human beings and be the spirit guide? You're there when they need you, but what do you do else? I mean, it's an absurd concept. And it's like, the best way to really put it and explain what it is that these are AI entities. They act like the chaperone that you get when you go to North Korea. That's your mentor. So it's like, this is the spiritual prison component of what you would get. The government would assign somebody to you in North Korea, because it's literally what it is when you step out of the realm of the controlled belief systems and you get into the occult area or the new age, you start wanting to be able to engage and do these things. That's when the system comes after you to shut you down. And that's exactly what was going on with this group, because the people that were coming into it were like me. We had psychic abilities, abductions. Most of us didn't know about it. We weren't sure what we were, but we knew we were having these experiences, and we would come into this group looking for answers, at which point we'd start having experiences with extraterrestrials and AI beings that were computer generated, using transdimensional technology, just like they did in ancient times. The risk involved here is that for the regular people that aren't already military abduction victims, because every abduction victim that's taken by ETs is taken also in that's in cooperation with the U.S. military, or whatever military or official government that you live under. Depending on where you live, simply depends on a treaty with these ETs. So if you live in the UK, you may fall under the same treaty as the one under the United States or Canada. If you live in Russia, you're going to fall under a different treaty to be abducted. And it's to get technology, but it was a way to essentially take over the human governments. And it's a deceptive program of taking over the planet. They already had control, but they needed to get control of the governments because the overall plan is to depopulate and replace human beings with a reptilian humanoid, which is what these hybrid programs are about. Not a purebred humanoid or not a pure reptilian, but a hybridized version. Could either be a gray human hybrid or a reptilian human hybrid, but that's what their plan is. And this is what I found out after all this came out. So here I am. I'm in this cult. The first thing that happened to me is that the night that I decided to join it, I was sending this woman an email. And as I typed the word, say, or the name Satan, I typed the S. I had this ET come into the room. I later found out it was a Draco disguising himself as a man. I couldn't see who he was at that point. I saw a silhouette. It looked like the Predator in a sense because there was a headdress. But what really got me was the way the Predator looks with that type of camouflage that the movie it looks. But this was a bit different. It wasn't where you could see a silhouette. It was like heat coming off of a pavement, like those wavy heat, waves that go through the air that you see. And I could see the outline of a man. Came into my room. I was in a room where you came in. I was facing a wall, and to my left was the doorway. And it was a long rectangular room. It's an addition, a porch that was enclosed and turned into a room. This being came in, touched me on my left side, and walked out. And prior to me sitting down, I took several bong hits. I was pretty high on cannabis. And because of what they've been doing to me over the years, I've had spine surgery. So my tailbone was sore when I was sitting there. I had some back pain. All of that went away, and I was completely sober, at which point, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I just flushed out who's been messing with me my entire life. Now, either one of two things are true. Number one, either this is the devil and this is demons or negative ETs, and I just barked up the wrong tree. But if that's the case, why aren't the good ones who are supposedly here to help me and my guardians and all that stuff that I've been conditioned to think, where are they at? Why aren't they stepping in right now? So it must be that I'm on the right path. And it felt that way. It felt like I was heading home. Literally, that's the way that's the mind control. The emotion they put into me was that I was connecting to home. So this being left the room, I sat there for a little bit. I got up and I was gathering my thoughts in the kitchen. I went to go into my bedroom. My wife was asleep. My son at the time was he was 2000, so he was 2. He was still sleeping with us at that point. So he wasn't in his bedroom. He was in ours. His bedroom's next to ours. So when I walked by, I could sense the presence of this being in his room. It's what it felt like. I'm thinking, oh, he's still here. So I go in my bedroom. It's dark. I'm just seeing things through the light coming through, the windows from the street light out front. And I put something in the closet and I turned around and I went to walk out of the room. And as I did, I noticed that this entity was there, this male. Now he's a shadow figure of a thin-billed male with long hair. He's between the bed and the wall, which is about a 3-inch gap. And he runs, and he's two-dimensional at this point. He's like, it's like a shadow being projected onto a wall, and he runs along the wall and right in front of me. And I felt like wind passed me, but it wasn't wind. It was just energy. Went right into the wall to my right. And I stumbled back like a foot or two, like 2 steps or so. And my wife woke up and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm putting my contacts away." And I just played it off. And I walked out of the room and I was just like, here it goes. And it's like, I'm right where I need to be is what it felt like. This is the beginning. And I had gotten a lot more than what I bargained for after that, because it wasn't but a few more months. It was probably, I didn't pursue it too much, but I joined the group. I went in and I told people the story. Immediately, within a short amount of time, a day or two, I think it was, I was recruited into a subgroup, which was a spiritual warfare group, because that's what they encouraged us to do, was to break off into these little groups and work with the demons, because the theology was based around the inversion of the New Age movement. So instead of a guardian angel, you had a demon that was your guardian, and you had to go into the Goetia, which is 72 fallen angels, and you could print out this a page that had all the sigils on it, and you would take a pendulum and go over it. And mine was Amdusius. So that became my guardian demon, and this Amdusius character was this Draco that I didn't know that's what it was, but it was the being that came in that room that night. So I began having contact with this being, first through a pendulum, and then it was telepathic, and then it was a hybrid version of the two. It was like using props and in telepathy. So it was like this process of advancing and meditating and all this. It was just an inversion of the New Age, no different. But it was all a military program under Project Ibis. So this was all being run, at least with what I was dealing with, because there's a lot of DUMBs around the world, deep underground military bases. But this was White Sands, New Mexico. I'm thinking I'm talking to beings in Orion, when in fact I'm talking to ETs and AI from a military base in New Mexico, of all places. And so this goes on for a good 15 years, and it turned my life upside down. In the process of this, I tried to reach out to many different researchers, starting in 2008. First person I described this to, when I was thinking about contacting Project Camelot, my friend literally they made him pass out in the middle of the conversation and drained his energy to where he felt exhausted when I woke him up. And it was a warning sign. I was verbally warned telepathically not to talk to anybody. So I didn't for a while, and I kind of kept quiet. And then eventually it just, I felt like I had a moral obligation to talk about this. So I kept trying to do it. And at which point they made me really sick. I came down with autonomic nervous system failure. I had, all of the symptoms that you would get from vagus nerve damage. And they made me sick my whole life. I had 7 spine surgeries. I've had 7 sinus surgeries. I've got 3 levels fused in my lumbar spine and 2 in my neck. I'm riddled with scar tissue and nerve damage. So I've had a lot of health issues. So, it wasn't a surprise, really. I had a lot of difficulty getting help because I'm also a targeted individual. So I had a lot of the COINTELPRO crap going on where doctors wouldn't treat me. And because it was a rare disorder, it also was very easy to fall into that particular problem where you can't get help. So this went on for a bit, and and then I was fed this scenario, essentially, that I was in this engineered lifetime. This is all done for therapeutic purpose. But now what they wanted me to do, they wanted me to be a social media personality. The problem was they'd given me a speech impairment throughout my life. So I had a lot of stuttering at this point. All of this, by the way, was something they had induced. There was a little bit of brain damage they induced, but that could have been cured. But what they did is they were using what I call etheric implants. These are energetic attachments that were giving me the speech impairment. They also gave me a lot of brain fog too. And of course, being sick, you associate it with that. It kind of overlaps itself. But so yeah, that was going on. And I'd been sick it took 11 months, actually about 10 months to actually get tested for this. So I had to go to the University of Maryland, and it took around 6 to 7 months prior to that, before that wait even started, just to get a doctor to help me. And I had to go through all sorts of obstacles to do that, even going through the administration. I had to go through the administrator. One of the top guy in the neurological department at Johns Hopkins actually helped me out, because he looked at me. He was able to get my medical records without even getting permission from me, just over a phone, just from a phone conversation with my name and everything, and realized that I had, he validated that I had this neck surgery. So they figured, okay, it's probably vagus nerve damage from that. Not, so 7 months into the wait, my symptoms go away. And I'm told by the ETs that I'm having contact with, because at this point, I was having contact with a being who addressed himself as Relakia. That was the one that came into that room at that particular time. That was a very abusive relationship that I had for about 6 or 7 months with him. And then this other woman, this female, came into the picture, which was a counterfeit version of an extraterrestrial spouse that I have. Name's her. Well, anyway, I went through a lot of abuse with that as well. And so this went on for a period of time, and I became friends with a woman named Sherry, who lived about 80 miles south of me here in Maryland. And she was a member of the Joy of Satan. So we actually used each other for support, because she was being abused just like I was. And just like me, she had her health destroyed. So what I found out was, Brandon, is that they are running a program, and it's not just at White Sands, but as part of Project Alpha, they have a program where they take their failed super soldier projects. These are the ones that they can't control. And it took a long time for me to understand this. And I'll tell you how I found out in just a moment. But what they do is they take the ones, and how things unravel with these people who are in these programs. And this is what they do. I guess I just get to it. They create a placeholder in society. The placeholder starts with the first time the person's abducted. That's when they become the placeholder. And I mean, placeholder is there. If you look at them, you look at that person as a petri dish, not just a biological petri dish, because that's not what's important. It's the soul. It's a petri dish of the soul. That's the placeholder they put in society. What Project Surrogate does is that after the abduction takes place, once that takes place, and how this works is that, I'm jumping around here, but there's a transdimensional AI system that creates a augmented reality I refer to as the planetary consciousness simulation. It binds us to 5 senses. The evidence of this is, well, you can see the ETs are psychic, animals are psychic, but people aren't. If you look into it a little bit deeper, you'll know there's an anomaly on the planet Saturn at the North Pole. It's a 6-sided hexagonal storm that's permanently circulating. It's permanently rotating. No one can explain why it's there, how it's formed. They have various ideas, but they have no way to test this. They have no scientific evidence to show that what their hypothesis is even possible. What I was shown was during the 15-year phase of the contactee phase of this experience is that they augmented our consciousness at a planetary level by creating a frequency generator that they put into a gas giant. It levitates in the atmosphere, and it creates it puts out a frequency, but it's not the frequency that's creating the hexagon storm. That's sound waves, apparently. Some sort of byproduct of this process, or this thing running, creates sound waves of some kind. And there's a specific frequency. If you look into any research I don't forget what the hell, it's sonic and it's sound waves, but if they put particles on a metal plate and they induce sound waves, you can create geometric patterns. The particles will assemble into the pattern depending on the frequency. There's a frequency that creates a hexagon. There's one that creates an octagon, and it creates fractal types of shapes. I think there's even a lotus flower that can be made with a specific frequency or something like that. And that's what's creating that. But, what its purpose is to create what I call psychic white noise. It literally just drowns out the collective consciousness. And this is what remote viewers are actually fighting against, because when you remote view, you go through a lot of different protocols that have been developed specifically to squelch your imagination. You're suppressing the imagination, and you're opening up the subconscious mind. So when the person that assigns you a target, they don't tell you what the target is. You work blind, completely blind to the target. And you may work with other remote viewers on a project, and they're all blind and not allowed to speak to each other. That's to get rid of the imagination that floods the weak psychic signal from the collective subconscious. This technology is creating that white noise that is making it weak, so we can't connect to God. We can't connect to past life loved ones. We can't connect to each other. We're like computers taken off the network. And it's done that way to exploit humanity. And it's really what the spiritual war is about in creation. There's a version of it we get in the Bible and stuff like that, and other holy books, this ancient war between good and evil, with humanity hanging at the mercy of the outcome. But in order for this to happen, they have to suppress consciousness, and they put us into an augmented reality, and that's what they've done. So it allows them to play God with us. The big risk of getting involved with these virtual temple complexes, and I kept touching on this, not really getting into it, is that it leads to abductions. If you're psychically inclined and you get involved with one of these groups, either the Joy of Satan or some other New Age contactee cult or belief system, and you begin having contact with ETs and doing the meditations and everything, you're opening yourself up, not to demonic possession so much like what the Christians would say. What you're opening yourself up to is usury at the point of the soul, being hijacked between lifetimes, and becoming an abductee and being used in programs on planet and off planet, sometimes for social engineering purposes, not necessarily for the betterment of humanity, for sure, if it's the negative ones doing it. The good ETs don't do this, and it's the negative ones. Anyone who's abducted by extraterrestrials and comes back and says, they were really nice, they look human, they were benevolent, they're loving, they're space brothers and sisters, that's a lie. If they abduct you and take you against your will, they're negative. They don't respect your free will. They don't respect your sovereignty. I can't stress that enough to anybody out there listening to this. Do not trust them. Do not let them in. It's like letting the devil into your life. It's the same exact thing. In fact, they work for a demonic hierarchy. At the very top of this, there's a demonic hierarchy. At the very top of the opposition, there's an angelic hierarchy or a council. And, I'm kind of like combining all of this together, all these belief systems together, because every one of them has a certain core of truth, and all of it has some form of relevance, and it all fits together like a puzzle because it has relevance, because there's factual information in the Bible and other books and other things that we've been given, because both sides have seeded this information in a conflict with each other to get us to wake up or to stay asleep. So when you're hijacked, you get involved in this stuff and you become an abductee yourself. You're trapped in this. You don't have control over yourself, and they will take you over and they will utilize you. And this has been done in ancient times. They talk about pharaohs, for example, being of the gods, and that they were put in power by the ET gods. And that's true, because what these were extraterrestrial souls, generally from the angelic side. When I mean angelic, there's a difference to get into that, but they're the guardians for the rest of the life forms. Essentially, they're not limited to any particular realm of existence. They're fully transdimensional. They don't have a physical body, but they can manifest physically. They're energy. They're pure energy, and essentially, they are there to keep order, and the opposite side is essentially there to create chaos and usury. And both groups will influence the ET cultures, the lower life forms, all the different ETs that you see, including humanity. They're all there. They're over top of them. And, it is closer to the biblical story in some aspects, the nature of reality, that is, than people realize. And a lot of people think that it's too much like the biblical story. And that's where the confusion comes in. And that's actually plays into the hands of the enemy, because if you simply believe these are demons and nothing else, you're in for a really bad ride and a bad experience. You've got to understand your enemy and know how they function, what their modus operandi is. So that's the risk of this. And that's how people become initiates. Like in ancient times, they would be put into these ceremonies and initiated into it. A human sacrifice could lead to this, just being part of it. I mean, and I've got a total of about 30 lifetimes in Egypt. I don't remember much of it, but I remember the number. I remember a lot about what I was doing. And essentially, I was being hijacked lifetime after lifetime and put into these temples and used, just like many other people have been used, as basically religious props, religious puppets to socially engineer the population. And what I'm going to explain to you is that the prophets of old are now the new age gurus and occult gurus online, because it's gone virtual. They don't need to build pyramids and temples, megalithic temple structures anymore. All they have to do is take one of their MILAB victims, mind control them, because they're already mind controlled anyway, and task them, put them into a spiritual frame of mind, give them a spiritual experience, and put them in society. They're the placeholder, but they use them to engineer the occult belief systems as well as the New Age movement. This was shown to me in a download. It goes back to George, I think it's George Van Tassel, the Integratron. But that was a military program that goes all the way back, and they've engineered this New Age movement to create a counterfeit awakening for the star seeds. And essentially, and there's also angelics coming here. The angelics are the ones that are the biggest target of these military programs, especially the super soldier programs, because they become the ultimate warrior if they're properly controlled and maintained and put under a controlled state of consciousness. So reviewing this, going back, you've got Project Surrogate, which was the memory that I had of being implanted into the fetus. But let's get into the Project Alpha and the project. And we were talking about the Project Ibis stuff of creating cults, but let's get back to the facility at White Sands and what the purpose of that was. Purpose of White Sands basically is to take the failed projects, the ones that are a threat to national security. And what they do is they take a clone of the placeholder. In my case, that clone was taken at age 6. What I found out was, this is after the hypnosis, that I was actually abducted the first time in 1947 in the state of Nevada. I was a male with brown hair. I don't know much about myself. A lot of this is being, kind of like locked away in my psyche, because for just the protection of my own continuity of self, because, I could easily fall apart and not be able to function anymore. I would shut down into a depression, almost like I did after the hypnosis session. So there's a lot that I don't have, and it's for good reasons. But, I was abducted in 1953 at age 7. Actually, wait a minute. It was 1954. So it was I was 7 years old. They like to get you around 6 to 7 for some reason. It's like the opportune time that they've, chosen in order to take you. So I was abducted, and I was put into the programs. And this was shortly after the treaties. I saw a video, someone posted in my Telegram group yesterday or day before, this treaty. I don't remember the name. I think it started with a G. It wasn't Grenada, but something like G, like four or five letters. It's supposed to be signed by President Eisenhower in 1954. 1954, 1955. What was odd about it is that it was right around the time that I was abducted. So, I apparently was one of the first people abducted into that program. And this wasn't considered to be Project Ibis. I don't know when Ibis started. I know it's a continuation of an ancient program that I've described, where they abduct people, hijack them, and utilize them for social engineering to create cults and religions. And also political leaders too. I mean, our civilization has been engineered. Our technological level of sophistication has been engineered and controlled and suppressed through repetitive cataclysms. So, there's a lot there I can talk about too. I don't have time today to do that. But so anyway, Project Alpha, that part of Project Alpha that deals with the failed prospects, the ones that they can't control. So I'm going to give you the rest of my story now so we can get into this, because I don't know how much time we've got. Let's see. It's 10:46.
So we probably got about another half hour.
Okay. So I need to wrap this up pretty quickly. This is where the shit hit the fan with me, because this was back in August. I was actually given another bout of heart failure again. It went on for like 6 months, and I'd gotten carvedilol as a prescription they put me on the first time. So I did a video. I showed the prescription. I talked about being sick, why I had made videos and all that. And this is all on my YouTube channel. I've kind of it's a record of my entire experience, my awakening from a diluted starseed to this. So what happened was, and this is where it gets really off the hook. Friend of mine came into I had a friend that came into my life, turned out to be a past life connection with me. I don't want to give her name because she hasn't went public yet. She's would rather, I'm waiting for her to do that. So until she does, then, we can get it all out. But she came into my life. She met me under a Leak Project video. We became friends. And she came in, she was subconsciously given a task to help me break away from this program. So over a year, so I don't remember specifically. I'd have to get all that and look at it and see when we met and everything else. But it was about a couple of years ago. But we started doing a podcast together and all these things. And she eventually realized that I was dealing with very negative ETs and I had the Stockholm syndrome. Anyway, it all came to a head back last August. I was getting death threats. I was being physically threatened. I was being injured by these ETs because, I wanted to do a podcast. I wanted to inform. I wanted to expose what was going on. I wanted to talk about it. And it's a long story here, but I had a lot of psychic harassment for a long period of time, like close to a year. This was like multiple ETs in my head. I had the voice to skull stuff going on. I had psychic attacks. I had injuries, physical injuries. Like I said, I've had 7 surgeries and everything. That was, all these things were happening to me. So anyway, I got to a point where they put an attachment onto my left ankle and it was causing extreme pain. I had difficulty walking and, it was causing tissue damage. So I asked my friend, because she does psychic healing, and, I for some reason, hadn't asked her before. Well, I had, but it had been a while and it just didn't occur to me for a while until I got really bad with this injury. And she took a look at it and she instantly had a psychic vision. And I was in a room in what looked like a government building with Dracos, regular ETs, like human looking ETs, and US military personnel. She's had God connected. Actually, she's had God or source experiences since she was a child. And, so she asked God to show her what was going on. And she had a series of downloads. And I've got this documented, she doesn't want me to share it with the public. I'm allowed to share it with certain people or for research purposes, but she left these series of voicemails on my cell phone while she was having these downloads. And she just was shown this entire program of human usury, and that and that there was a copy of me, and that I was a clone as well, or she thought I was a copy in some way. And, they were torturing me, and they had this version of me that they had cloned and taken when I was 6 years of age. And what they were doing was they were using this to make me sick and to mind control me. And they were taking pieces of the personality of this alter that I had and merging it with mine, like taking little pieces away from me and just exchanging it and blending my personality. They did all these things to me, which affected my marriage. The first thing that I noticed is they changed my sexual orientation. I was hetero. I went to more of a fluid kind of type of sexuality. My personality changed. My taste in clothes changed. I became more feminine. It was all these different things started to change in me right after my son was born. And it caused all this havoc in my life. And, so she's telling me all this stuff. And then, to make a long story short, what happened next is that the threats started getting worse. Everything started to get worse. And this was all over a period of about a week to a week and a half, at the end of August of last year. And prior to this, I started getting communication with my higher self, but it was under a controlled state of consciousness. And there was all these other delusions and things that they were giving me and false information. And, I'd done interviews about it. And I talked about counsels and things that actually were false and just this new agey shit that they were putting into me and just playing mind games with me. And what they would try to do with this cult that I was describing to you is they would try to push you to suicide. And then as you got right to it, they'd put a block in you and they would literally numb your emotions. So they were doing all sorts of things like this. I could go on for days and talk about the type of torture that I was put through. And this was all done to suppress my awakening, to stop me from breaking away from the program. And, and I interviewed a guy who was in this cult. He had a similar, not quite similar, but a negative experience with these extraterrestrials. There's another person that has similar experience to me that I couldn't get to do an interview because his mind was that damaged. It was so damn sad to try to talk to somebody who was literally was a normal person, and their mind and their life was destroyed. And they're now, on a disability check for mental illness because of this cult and this military program. So my higher self began contacting with me and told me that I had to burn away silver cords, and that these silver cords, and that how I was going to do this was channeling God's energy, and that, this was God getting me out of this. So what happened is that I had started to burn these cords off, and I was failing. They would reattach themselves. So my higher self was actually communicating, giving me coaching at this point. As soon as that happened, the following day, I went to the cardiologist, the second cardiologist appointment I had. The first one refused to treat me, just one of those COINTELPRO things, medical COINTELPRO. I'm pulling into the parking lot of the doctor's office, and this smooth talking reptilian starts talking to me. He was like the negotiator. And he tells me, he's like, and I had to tell him to wait until I finished the appointment. Appointment went well, and he started talking to me as I was leaving. And he said, see, everything went well for you here. We didn't interfere. This is what you can expect if you stop what you're doing and you start working for us. And he told me, he says, we can restore your health. I'll give you 20 years of good health. We have the full technology, all the technology to fix you completely if we want to. All you have to do is stop trying to break away from us and cooperate and work for us. Because in that memory inside that lab, what I was angry about is I was supposed to be a teacher. I was supposed to be a spiritual guru under Project Ibis. And part of Project Ibis is social engineering. It's an offensive type of social engineering program that corrals all of these awakening star seeds and MILABs into this group, and then essentially feeds them BS and gives them a false belief system that contradicts itself. This is why all of the contactees will say different things that contradict themselves. They'll have similarities, but they'll have significant differences. And then they fight amongst each other. And then their followers watch them and start adopting the belief system that they put out. And then they find that it's different from another contactee. So then they start battling with those people. And you start getting in these infighting, like Ishmael Perez versus Elena Denon, or Corey Good versus whoever, and it's all of this constant infighting and chaos and this is part of the program. This is what they're doing. They're derailing, they're sabotaging a global intuitive awakening of agents of change that are coming here in droves to these cosmic shores to turn this shit around. The ones they fear the most are the angelics. They're the ones that they use in the super soldier programs. They're the ones that they have to suppress because they're concerned, and it's a threat to them because there's enough of them here. There's enough of them at the capacity of full functionality, because there's a phenomenon where the higher self breaks away from the current self and acts independently. I did an interview with Angela Stotts, and we talked about that. It's not published yet. She's had these experiences where she's done soul rescues. My friend who helped me that I talked about earlier, she's done types of soul rescue and intervention stuff that she remembers bits and pieces of from the higher self. My higher self has interacted with people in this community, and they've contacted me, and we've established a relationship based on what happened that I had no recollection of, but they had an experience with that part of myself. This is after I broke free. Majority, I would say, of the angelic experiences that people have are actually the higher selves of angelic beings in human bodies living a human lifetime with their subconsciousness suppressed under a mission to do and be an agent of change, either in their lifetime consciously or for their higher self to do something in the esoteric realm, I guess you could call it, or the spiritual realm, to go out and do things around the world and heal people, help people, and do these types of things. It's much easier for them to put someone here to have a higher self that breaks away than to come into the system, because it's basically a matrix. It's a spiritual prison. And so as I started to burn these cords away, I had this interaction with this being, and he told me, he says, if you work for us, we'll make it all better, because you were supposed to do this for us in the beginning, and we had problems with you. So we changed what we were going to do with you, and we'd like to fix this. Now, prior to talking to him the night before, I had a female reptilian contact me and tell me and ask me if she said, you're very unhappy, I see. So, we can put you in a different program. Do you want to be part of it? I was grasping for straws at this point. I said, yeah, go ahead. That's when this other negotiator came to talk to me. All I had to do was be a new age a new age influencer for them. Go out and spread the new age good news of this benevolent Galactic Federation space brother nonsense. They wanted me to write books. They were going to completely take away my speech impairment. They were going to just stop, because every time I tried to do an interview, I'm not an interview, but it was interviews too, but I was doing podcasts, making videos, and not only would I had speech problems, but I had cognitive issues. This wasn't just the long COVID I'd had, which came into effect around 2021, but this was stuff that they were doing to me. It was psychic interference, cognitive interference. I couldn't get my thoughts together. I couldn't even do an interview like this. It would be impossible to do it at that point. I couldn't get a coherent stream of thoughts out of my mouth. They were going to fix all that, and they were going to change this. I started asking, I said, well, who else knows about this? And I started naming names. He wouldn't give me names, but if I gave him a name, he would give me information. I named a bunch of people within the New Age community who have podcasts and influencers, and they said, yeah, they all inadvertently work for us. We're deceiving all of them. And I said, well, you want me to do this for you, but I know who I'm working for. I know what your agenda is. That's when he told me about the reptilian humanoid replacing humanity and all this other crap. Anyway, to make a long story short, he said that there's other people. There's a very small number that actually know the agenda. They're in on it. But I would be one of them if I accepted this. And I held this being for about 10 hours of conversation to try to pump him for information and to mess with his head. Because that's what I had been doing at this point. Because for the past 7 or 8 months, I had constant psychic harassment with different ETs coming into my head, from mantids to greys to human ETs, and ultimately to military personnel, which I didn't figure out until after this next thing happened. After I told him to shove it, he said they were going to kill me. The next thing that took place is that night I was interrogated telepathically by a corporal from the White Sands base. And he started talking to me, and he sounded completely like a regular person. And I said, who are you? You don't feel like an ET. You don't have that energy signature. You don't have the cadence in your voice. You just don't seem like you came from somewhere else. And he says, I'm a psychic super soldier. He says, the ones that you talk about killing. And that's because I had done a podcast or two where I talked about the possibility that there was going to be psychic sleeper cells in the form of people's higher selves who were here to liberate humanity by killing these bastards and these dumbs by inducing mass cardiac arrest throughout the entire base. This is something that right before because I had 3 positive ETs come in that were allowed to speak to me under controlled conditions. They were policed by AI. When they told me too much, they would remove them and somebody else would come. The goal was to get them to convince me to go home and give this up, to stop fighting them and to let them get rid of me, eject me from their system. Essentially is what they were doing, was kind of a conditioning process. But the others, the ones who were talking to me, were actually giving me information and kind of like feeding me what I needed to wake up, to realize what the situation was. And I was told that some of these things were going to happen prior to them happening, about 3 months prior to that. So I get into the situation where the super soldier's interrogating me, and he asked me, he says, if you answer some questions for me, I'll answer some questions for you. He says, I just need to know who and what are you? And at this point, I've got my higher self talking in my head, and my higher self is saying angelic. And I hadn't even embraced any of this stuff. This sounded like the woo that you hear about in the super soldier community, things that are just so outrageous that you say, I can't be true. I hear this in the back of my mind, and I say telepathically, I said, I'm a Hajayan woman who cares, because I knew my higher self is female. Hajayans are about 8 feet, just under 8 feet tall. They have golden brown skin, long black hair. They have very dark eyes, vertical slits, 5 digits. The blood is copper based, for it's more efficient for oxygen, for carrying oxygen than iron, and more thinner atmospheres. They don't have sweat glands. They kind of use their the capillaries as kind of like a rate to radiate heat off the surface of the skin, much like a dog in a sense, but the dog actually aspirates, air cooled versus liquid cooled or evaporative cooling. This is more conductive, cooling. So they don't have the same kind of cooling system that, we have, which is evaporative sweat cooling. It's all done to handle higher temperatures. It's more of and also to get rid of the odor that sweat causes. So they've genetically engineered their bodies to suit themselves, instead of what we've got, which is what we got stuck with, and a lot of flaws as well. So, so anyway, getting back to what I was doing, I was burning these cords away. So after I had all these discussions and I was going through this thing with a super soldier, he told me, he says, you were like an empty suit of armor to us. And he was describing things to me that I had no idea I was in a super soldier program. And he was talking as if I knew, because he didn't trust me. He thought that I knew more than what I was alluding to. And he kept trying to kind of like get more out of me, to get me to admit something, which I didn't know, So I'm trying to get information out of him, and he's trying to doing the same thing to me. He says, you've got 14 days to live. We've made a decision to terminate you. We can't control you, and we're going to get rid of you and send you back where you come from. And so why do you give me 14 days? And he said, because we have a treaty with your race that we have to give them a 14-day notice. We're injecting them from the system. You're going to go back where you came from. And he says, if I had my way, we'd kill you right now. But because of the treaty, we can't do it. But I am going to ask my superior officer if there's a possible way to do it. And that was just an empty threat, really. And I just was like a smartass. I mean, at this point, I've been through so much miserable hell in my life with being sick and everything that they've done to me. I was happy to go home. I felt relieved. But my higher self had other plans and was on me, burn the damn cords is the message that I kept getting. So, anyway, this whole thing kind of stopped for a little bit, and the super soldier went away, and I started to burn the cords. It took me about an hour to do this. I had to burn them all at the same time. There was a 6-inch, it looked like 6 inches wide. I didn't measure it, obviously, but it's in my astral sight. My astral sight opened up for once. I could finally see. And I was shown my entire etheric body, my energy body, floating in a void, standing upright, covered in silver cords, going into from every direction off into an abyss like a void. And I was told that you have to burn them off. And I had to heat them all up at the same time, channeling God's white light energy into it. They burnt like a filament in a lamp, like an incandescent lamp. So I had to heat them all up at the same time. Once I got rid of all the little ones through the heating process, it temporarily disabled the AI transdimensional supercomputer that was tying all this together to do this to me. And what they were doing, Brandon, is that these silver corded connections were connected to a copy of me, a clone of me at White Sands, and they would physically torture that clone. And it would, like a voodoo doll, it would manifest physical tissue injuries in my body. And when they would get to the point where they overdid it with the clone, and the clone would have to be replaced, they'd kill it, recycle the soul, which was a soul fragment from me, because I'm actually a soul fragment from one of the clones that was in that military program, in that soul transference and fracturing memory. That machine fractures the soul and transfers that fragment to a fetus at the 12th week of conception under Project Surrogate. So, and So I'm in this situation, and I'm being threatened. The threats go away. The evening quiets down. I burn off all the cords. I finally get to the last one, which is the life force cord, which is between my shoulder blades and right out of my back. I had to break the connection with that, because if they killed the clone in the way they wanted to do it, it would kill me, because it was manifesting in both of us. This was also a way to mind control me as well, because they were overriding my higher self to a degree. And when my higher self broke free of it, that's when they wanted to know why this was happening. So during this time, I was shown my body in this room that my friend saw. It was a big white room. There was Dracos there. There was military and other ETs there. And I saw my body laying on a gurney that they rolled in, and there was rows of them. This room was huge. I don't know how many people there were in this room that were these victims, but they had a bunch of us in there in rows at workstations. They were injecting things into my ankle that my friend saw. And while I was sitting there and they were showing me this, I had this reptilian that I referred to as Albert, just to mock him and make fun of him. But he was a short, stumpy thing, like a drum shape, big and round. And and he had this maniacal sound to him. He was very threatening, and I just mocked him and made fun of him. And and he was inflicting pain on me. And one of the things that he did is I felt this piercing feeling going through one of my testicles. And he showed me a vision of myself, my alter, my clone, in this room, where they had taken a needle, like a needle that you would use as a flavor injector, and they shoved it through my genitals, and there was a pool of blood between my legs on a hospital pad. I was laying there naked. They showed me this, and then they showed me a close-up of it going through my genitals, or that version of me's genitals. And they were trying to inflict pain, fear, and everything else they could to get me under control. I resisted. And then when I burnt all the cords off, when I finally burnt off the big one in the center of my back, and I felt this burst of energy like emanate from my waist upward. And there was a shower of sparks. It looked like a coax cable, the very tip. It didn't have the needle, but it had like the wide shape to it. Like it widened out at the very end where it plugged into you. And when it detached, it was a surging sound, like a Van de Graaff generator, and it like crackling, and then like sparks and stuff, and an energy surge. And immediately, as soon as that happened, I heard this woman in a loudspeaker voice say, "Nathan, you've done something very bad." At which point, the super soldiers stepped back in. I had the same one that I was interrogating me, and I had two others, and I could see them vaguely, and it was a cloudy view. It was kind of dark and shadowy, but there was bright parts of it. And I could see them in this room in front of a computer. And this guy started running his mouth to me, and he was making threats. And he says, "We're going to get you now." He says, you're as good as dead, more or less. And all of a sudden I started feeling really sick. I felt like it was an intense magnetic field hit me. And I know what a magnetic field sensitivity feels like, because I did a meditation a couple years prior to that with a friend in the Joy of Satan. And he charged me up full of energy. And I tried to go near a light, one of those spiral fluorescent light bulbs. It was at the very foot of the steps coming out of my basement. So I tried to go into the basement. I couldn't even get within 6 feet of this thing. I actually had to lay on my back on the steps and slide down the steps, because if I got any closer, I felt disoriented from the magnetic field it was putting out. So I know what a magnetic field feels like when it's intense. And this was really intense, to the point where my eyes looked like they were going in and out of focus. I felt like almost nauseous, weak, like an implosion of my stomach almost. Not like you had to puke, but it was just like, I don't know how to describe it, but it was just sick. Like your life was being drained out of you. And I said to him, I said, "What is that?" I said, "Are you doing that?" And he says, "That's directed energy. How do you like it?" Instantly, as soon as this happened, my higher self activated. And this is why they want to get rid of me, why they want to get rid of a lot of us, because we have these abilities. I can't harness them. I can't make them happen. I can't demonstrate it, but when it needs to happen, it happens. I saw two arms come out in front of me in my mind's eye, and two hands, and the palm of each hand cupped the sides of this pocket, this bubble of energy, this electromagnetic frequency or energy I was being hit with, I guess from a satellite or a Gwen tower or maybe a cell phone tower. I don't know what, but the arms that I could see literally just went from right to left and pushed it right to where it was literally focused on the space next to me, doing absolutely nothing. I had probably been exposed for maybe 15 or 20 seconds to this. And then I felt all this negative magnetic energy literally coming from my feet and going out my head, just being literally pushed out. And I felt instantly better. And the effect I was lightheaded for about off and on for about an hour afterward. But right as that happened, I heard this super soldier, the same corporal guy, say, he stuttered and he stammered a bit. And he said, I heard him counting, it was like 60, 70. You just deflected 80% of that energy. And I said to him, why don't you send it again so I can get some practice? Maybe I'll be able to deflect 100%. What I should have said is that, why don't you hit me again and then I can share it with you. So then you can tell me how it feels. Because that's what they were worried about, that if I could move it out of my body and push it out of just completely expel it out of my body and move it and manipulate it over and take control of it, that I could send it back. They never hit me with that shit again. And I've got friends that are also in this too, that are MILABs and some that are just targeted people to get hit with this or have psychic abilities. They can't do this. And I feel really bad for them because it makes them sick and it's hurting them. And, there's nothing that I can do. I can't help them, but I can help myself. Thank God I can help myself. So at that point, it was just, they backed away. But before they did, they kept saying shit, threatening me and doing and trying other things. And they were using these energy attachments. And this was all going on at the same time. This is like within minutes after the directed energy attack. That's when I saw my higher self literally do something else. I saw this big sphere of light, of white light, pop out of my left side, in my mind's eye, and fly off. Like that movie Phantasm with the chrome spears that would fly away and like fork people in the head. Well, this went straight into the head, straight into the face of one of those military personnel. And then once I saw this happen, it was the best way to describe this is if your higher self took you over and you were first time you've never ridden a bicycle and your higher self says, let me show you how to do it. And then takes you over. Then you get on the bike, ride around like you've been riding your whole life and get off. And now you've got all that muscle memory. You've got that repetitive loop in your neural networks that just loops and it creates that memory to be able to ride a bicycle. Now you can do it, even though you've never done it, but somebody took you over and did it in your body. Now you can do it. It was a lot like that because now I could send these spheres and I hit them with rapid fire. I mean, it was nonstop until they literally begged me to stop. And they said, look, we'll leave you alone if you leave us alone. And of course, it was a lie, and I said, sure, that sounds good. And then he came back a few minutes later and says, we were lying to you. You don't have any intuition. It was just them fucking with me or just trying to get something in like the last little stab. But that night is that was the night that I broke away officially from the program. My clone, what I found out is that the clone that I had that they were using to make me sick was terminated. And that, that was the last of it. All of my alters had been destroyed and been terminated because there was 27 insubordinate kills of military personnel among numerous alters that were versions of me, not necessarily look like me, but my soul fragment was in a body. In the case of the soul transference, I was in a Hajayan hybrid body, which is where I get my Hajayan Contactee YouTube channel name from. But the Hajayans is the race that I came from. And that, so I was in there. The three people that are in that lab with me were Hajayan. I eventually remembered seeing and looking at them and noticing what race they were. And they're actually Dracos that were using that particular container body for whatever purpose. It was more advantageous and more effective at the work they were doing. It was also better in the memory if I saw someone that looked human, even though I couldn't see their faces. If I would have seen a Draco, it would have been a hell of a lot harder to convince me of all the lies that they convinced me over the course of my life about the true nature of myself. And so at that point, that's when I broke free of this. And my life has just been a constant battle ever since. I've had, there was a total of 2 attempts in my life from the 2 heart-related illnesses that they gave me. But I mean, for months and months after that, after I broke free, I mean, it was constant daily energetic attachments that caused pretty severe physical pain. But for once now that I was broken free and out of their control, I finally had the ability to remove these attachments by channeling God's energy in, and literally just like I burnt off the cords, I could burn off these attachments. And it's just been that way ever since. And, I'm really thankful because there's been some wonderful people, 2 of them mainly, that came into my life, and 3 technically, because, Robert from the Typical Skeptic podcast was the first person that gave me a chance to tell my story after close around 15 years of attempting to tell it and getting anybody to listen to me. And he literally helped me, because that was the catalyst that I needed to flush out this whole mess that was hiding behind every aspect of my life. And it allowed me to gaslight them in such a way that they showed their self. It allowed me to get other people to help me as well. I have my friend that I do podcasts with came into my life, and is a psychic mentor. And he does a type of therapeutic counseling, psychic counseling, where he can see what's going on with you, and then he gets you to deprogram by waking you up and hinting and talking to you over a long period of time. He was able to break me out of the conditioning, and it allowed me to see things that I needed to see, which led to me breaking free. My other friend who had she had those powerful downloads, psychic downloads. She was there for emotional support, just like he was, but she was the one that had the visions that told me what was going on, that it snapped me out of it, that led to all these things happening over the course of that less than 2 weeks that it all transpired. And since then it's just been it's just been it's just very, very difficult, because you go through depression, post-traumatic stress disorder type events where it's difficult to get this out of your head. I mean, how do you deal with this type of thing? It involves your life, your death. The thought that, the idea that I'd been hijacked for 2 straight lifetimes consecutively against my will and used for programs that thankfully I don't even remember, because if I did, I'd probably fall apart. I know that I was used as an assassin. I had a female and a male assassin that was used in these programs. I've been able to kind of piece together that they have technology that allows them to utilize portals. So in these dreams that I was having, I would go down a stairwell or go through an elevator or something like that. I'd come out into the base, but I had a dream when I was in New York City, and I went into the subway and went into a doorway, and boom, I was in the base. It's like a jump room or a portal technology that they use. So they can literally put people that are mind controlled agents out into the public to carry out something. And then they go into a closet, and that closet, they're back at the base. They don't need to have an elevator that has technology in it. They can create a portal using everyday things that are around us and you wind up back at the base. That's the disgusting level of technology that they have, that they're utilizing. It's what they use to control people in government, to keep people in line, to keep the agenda going. The entire situation we've got right now is engineered by ETs. The chaos in Ukraine, the war, the wars that we've always had, the conflicts, the suffering, the environmental problems, the repetitive cataclysms, the barbaric religions that we're dealing with. All of it is a product of alien intervention in the human experience. And this transdimensional consciousness simulation, like I was mentioning before, is generated by something in the planet Saturn. There's talk of there's like occult information, spiritual beliefs, whatever you want to call. There's something called the cube of Saturn. There's a lot of occult related belief system surrounding Saturn, that it has something to do with manipulating human consciousness, and it actually does. It's technology. If you look at the Ringmakers of Saturn, for example, the book, The Ringmakers of Saturn, written by a retired NASA scientist, it shows data from the Cassini mission that shows large spacecraft creating the rings, dispersing material. They comb and disperse it, and they disperse a crystalline substance that acts like a reflector. So the entire ring system of Saturn is artificial. It's a reflector dish to broadcast the signal that's generated from technology that's in the atmosphere of the planet. It causes that six-sided storm at the North Pole. If you look at the orientation of the North Pole to the ring structure, it's in dead center, like a satellite dish, like a broadcast dish, because that's what it is. They take gas giants and convert them to a broadcasting station. There's a movie called They Live where they were kind of doing something like that, but it was on the rooftop of a TV station, or multiple ones. It was like the plot there. But a lot of our fiction, a lot of that information is seeded in our consciousness by the subconscious influence of people who make movies in Hollywood, and people who write books and stories and things. They've got many ways to influence our culture, positive and negative. So this would be possibly the positive side, putting these ideas in the people's heads. But as we've developed, and just in the course of my lifetime, people have woken up and are starting to associate things that are going on that people like myself are talking about with movies, because it sows the psychological seed of understanding. When you have a movie like They Live, and you have a broadcasting dish drowning out people's perceptions and controlling their consciousness. So it's a lot like that. And then you have technology on the moon and technology in Mars. Essentially, what that does, it creates the soul recycling system. One of the big proofs that the planetary consciousness simulation is nearing its end, it's being phased out. And I did an interview about a month ago with Dr. Courtney Brown from the Farsight Institute on Rob's channel, the Typical Skeptic podcast. He invited me on as a guest to co-interview Dr. Courtney Brown, who's been doing incredible work by filming UFOs in infrared with a modified video camera. He's doing presentations around the world now at different universities with other academics. It's the part of the disclosure that the government doesn't want to talk about and the skeptics won't touch. But, I hit him with some good questions, because he's tuned into all of this stuff. They've remote viewed a lot of this infrastructure. They just haven't did the Saturn aspect of it. They remote viewed how the magnetosphere of the planet is weaponized to keep souls in. It's a shield with technology that's out of phase with our reality, so that physical objects can pass, rockets, spacecraft, whatever, asteroids, you name it, can pass through these objects because they're like ghosts, but they exist at a different frequency level of reality. And it's the same frequency level of the soul. So when the person's soul leaves their body, they get zapped and they get recycled. And proof that this is coming to an end. One of the pieces of evidence I didn't get a chance to ask Courtney Brown, maybe in the future I get a chance to ask him this question, is that, in Ingo Swann's book, Penetration, he was tasked by the CIA to remote view a man who died and to see where his soul went after death. And what he saw is that this man's soul was approaching the moon. So he pursued him. And he got close enough to where this loudspeaker-like voice would say, "You're not permitted to go any further, turn back." And when he didn't listen, it got louder until it caused physical pain in his body. And he had to pull out of the remote viewing session because he couldn't go any further. If you look at that, and then you look at years later, there was a small remote viewing group called Technical Intuition at first remote viewed the soul recycling system and published a YouTube video about it. They were able to get in and see a lot more. And then when Dr. Courtney Brown with his remote viewers got together and started doing all these remote viewing projects on these soul recycling and all of that stuff that's going on, they were shown even more of the infrastructure. They were shown even more of it. And the reason is, and I want everybody to listen to this tonight to take this away. This is the takeaway from here. There is a angelic council. These are People look just like, they're all the different races. They can be any race they want. They're transdimensional. They're the guardians, and they live amongst everybody else. And they carry out these missions, but they have taken control over this technology that creates this augmented reality and are gradually reducing it and phasing it out. You can't take it away right away, because everyone would instantaneously remember every past life they ever had. They would remember all of it. It would be too much. It would literally just basically break people apart at a conscious level. You couldn't handle it. The pain and suffering that I've been through, recalling little bits and pieces of past life memories from my ET existence and everything, and the things that I've had to deal with, that's enough to make you suicidal. It's enough to destabilize you to the point where you can't function. Society would fall apart, and everyone individually would fall apart if they did that abruptly. It's being done over a period of time, and I was told about 800 years, 800 year period of time, that this is all going to be completely phased out. But the first step here was to reduce the simulation itself, to thin the veil so that people could start to wake up and start to realize that their government system, their governmental systems are being controlled by an external force. And it's why we can't govern ourselves, because we don't have telepathy. We can't police our government. We can't police each other. And we're being manipulated, not just at an individual level, but Brandon, they've got technology that they can affect the mood and thoughts and belief systems of large populations of people using types of energetic technology, as well as a multi-leveled system of propaganda and suppression of consciousness. They've created this hell that we're in right now, and they utilize us. And what they do is they take people off planet. They abduct people from national forest. You've heard about that, the missing 411 stuff with, Mr. Politis, great researcher. He's done a lot of work. He's been stonewalled by the government, stonewalled by the National Park Service. They don't want this information out. There's a cover up of these abductions. These are people being pulled off planet, being pulled through portals and taken. Some of this has been remote viewed by right hemispheric remote viewing out of Northern California, who also, by the way, remote viewed the drones that make the rings. They're AI drones, mostly tubular shaped. That energy that's emitting from those rings was remote viewed in the IAPIDUS remote viewing study of the Farsight Institute. So, I've got to lay this out to Dr. Brown in an email eventually here. I promised him this about a month overdue. I hurt my back, so I'm behind on that. But he needs to have the rest of the pieces of this whole puzzle. And so that the good guys are now controlling our consciousness, and this is why we're waking up. The reason why the super soldier people like myself, the MILAB victims are waking up is for the same reason, but there's a different reason for that, because not only do we have to expose these programs, but like I said, there's aspects of our higher selves that are going to be activated at some point to purge these dumbs of these nasty people, these nasty beings. There's a purge coming on this planet. It'll happen and nobody will even know it takes place, because you won't see the effects on the surface government until later. But that's something that's in the works, and it's something that a lot of us know intuitively, that it's something, there's an event that's going to happen. There's a paradigm shift happening. Some of us are aware of it. Some of us are vaguely aware, and some of us are unaware, but know that there's a change coming, and we're all looking forward to it. So that's the takeaway here. Things are moving in the positive direction, but as they do, the downside of this is that the enemy ramps up its efforts. More wars, more things going wrong in our society, pandemics, you name it. It's all part of the negative engineering of our experience. It's all being done to control us. And that's what the goal is. The goal, like I said, is depopulation and elimination of the human species, and to replace it. Where would these souls go? They would go off planet into servitude. They'd be used just like they are now, but everyone would be utilized for something. There wouldn't be anybody here left except for the fools, the ones who facilitated this, the scumbag leadership that we have in our governments that would sell their soul for anything, a penny even. They'll be there as the ass lickers and the ass kissers of these ETs if they're lucky enough to be kept around and given any freedom at all. They don't see it that way, but that's the facts. And many of them are actually reptilians as well, because, we hear about that, but it's actually true. They do put their own people in these positions of authority, just like they used MILABs. Basically, I wouldn't say in the modern sense, they use MILABs, but they use abduction victims. I have a guy that I know, his name's Truman Cash. He's written 2 books, The Iran and the Programming of the Planet. Met him through a Project Avalon, and I've read his books, and he's the only person that really got it and resonated with me. And I finally made contact with him, and through Project Avalon. And he's one of these people that have been through this, and he has these amazing memory recall that he uses, a technique that was derived from Scientology, which actually was basically a CIA operation. Another one of these, and it probably had some ET roots in it too, because every religion has some sort of extraterrestrial connection to it. And of course, the modern day, they're all infiltrated by the intelligence agencies to maintain control and to monitor and so forth. But he remembers being Ramses II, and how the ETs, the Eye of Ra was actually an anti-gravity disc-shaped craft that would show up, and that's why we have the wing disc, the wing sun disc, because of the bright light that it emanated from the corona discharge that it puts off as it charges the air surrounding the craft and puts out that light. And he talks about being basically controlled by ETs, and how he was put into that body. He wasn't born into a family. The pharaohs were never born into families, despite what they are depicted as having children. Those children are given to them by the ETs. So that's why they say that pharaohs were basically the half man, half God, because they were from the gods. They're like the mediaries. And he talks about going to the craft and how, he would be scared to death to deal with Ra, who was a white-skinned man with a dark beard who had a serpent staff, like you see in the medical industry. You have that spiral helix staff, the 2 intertwined serpents. That was the symbol that they gave us. And he was literally told what to do. He made threats. You're not building it. You're not appreciating me enough. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to rain hell down on Egypt, or I'll do this and that. And he talks about all of that. He talks about the purpose of the pyramids. Farsight Institute view that, and I've got a memory of the Great Pyramid. One of my lifetimes when I was there, I was always used. Not always. I was a slave in one lifetime. I've been everything was slave to a pharaoh in Egypt. And when I was hijacked, and when they would hijack you, they'd put you in these positions. They'd put you in the priesthood. My friend who came into my life to help me, she and I were married in the Egyptian priesthood 18,000 years ago. We both figured that out. And they murdered us because we didn't carry out the human sacrifice. And, I was killed at another time building the Menkaure pyramid. I was using a levitation device that you'd hold this handheld device, would interface with your consciousness. And as the cut blocks would float, they would levitate because they had levitation device. They had towers that they would position geographically over a certain, they would have one near the build site, and they would space them out over certain, like every so many miles or whatever, kilometers, they would put one from the quarry to the build site. So there'd be a line of these towers, and these things are AI controlled, and they would levitate the stones from the quarries, which are now cut blocks, and they would levitate across the ground and just float. And when they got to the build site, we were all slaves. I was in my early 40s, which is unusual to live that long. But what I did was I stole one of the levitation devices that I was tasked to use. And my job was when the rows of cut blocks would come, I could use my mind holding this device in my hand, and every cut block had a black box that levitated above it. This handheld device would interface with the black boxes and control the position of where these stones are going. So I could split them up in groups and send them here or there, or whatever I had to do, whatever I was told to do. But the other slaves, when they positioned the stones, they would simply walk with it and use their fingertips and the palms of their hands to just nudge it because it was weightless. And they could put this giant stone precisely in the exact spot that it needed to be in. And then it would settle right in, and everything was cut with precision because it was computer controlled manufacturing. I mean, everything, those stones are so precisely cut, and it would take a very powerful computer to design that building and to do all that. And it cannot be done by people rubbing copper tools together and rubbing stones together. It's just, that's what they want you to believe, but it's one of the greatest lies. One of the most biggest bold-faced lies you could tell people is that primitive people built these structures and got them perfect and oriented them to the points of the compass, or to the stars. And like in every case, when they built these monuments, where they were oriented to in the sky usually represented the religion and where the afterlife was supposed to be for those particular people. In Egypt, it was Dawat, it was Orion, but in other places, it could be, the Pleiades, for example. We've got monuments oriented to the Pleiades that are literally laid out on the ground as the star formation itself, just like the 3 stars in Orion's belt, which is, the Giza Plateau. If you want to know the age of these pyramids, at least the 3 pyramids, I know the Menkaure pyramid goes back about 50,000 years. That was the first of the 3 that was built. The others are newer, and that's why that one is the most dilapidated. The original 3 that were on the Giza Plateau in that one spot were the 3 Queens pyramids, the really small ones. They were depicting Orion's belt, and then the ET gods wanted a bigger monument erected. So they started with what they call the Menkaure pyramid, but it had nothing to do with Menkaure at all. It goes back 50,000 years. And what happened to me is I stole the device. They're telepathic. They know exactly what's going on. There wasn't much time and it took before I got caught, and I hit it. I got arrested, if you want to call it that, taken into custody. I was tortured. I was beaten. And then I was poisoned in my cell. That was the punishment. Egypt was, you want to know what it's like in Egypt? It was harsh living. And if you didn't do what you were told to do, they killed you. You weren't even allowed to depict the ET gods unless they told you to. That's why there's almost no depictions of reptilians. I think there's one depiction I've seen. I've seen some grays and I think a wall relief of some kind, but you were forbidden to portray them in art or you were executed. That's why you don't see it. That's why the pyramids don't have any inscriptions on them. They were made to be ambiguous. It's just, and then, they knew that this was going to be something that was going to be looked at in the future by more modern civilizations that they were going to engineer in the future. So they wanted to create the scenario that they did. It's to keep us all in the spiritual prison, believing these belief systems and staying asleep is what it is. And they utilize humanity for genetics, soul fragments, for slave labor, as well as, like I said, the engineered lifetime program. I was told when I was dealing with these ETs before it got really bad and I broke away from them, is that 1/3 of the human population is seeded from elsewhere. The star seeds that you hear people talking about activation, they're a small portion of the actual real population of star seeds they're just basically transplants. They're put here, either kept here as a prisoner or put in a therapeutic lifetime for rehabilitation. And the reason they need to do that is because these races, they do not reproduce naturally. They've chosen to genetically engineer their bodies so that they do not, while they do reproduce, they're allowed to reproduce and have children if the population needs to expand or go elsewhere, but it's very tightly controlled. So you have a population of just people to live in perpetual adulthood through genetic engineering so that they don't age, and through and through soul transference technology and through cloning. So when their body starts to wear out, or if they get injured and it can't be repaired, they get a new body. You stay in perpetual adulthood for a long time, it creates an increase in the incidence of mental illness because you don't have the rebirth process. You don't have the process where you're reborn as a child. It's a renewing process. You go into adulthood, you go through the entire life cycle, you eventually, you die. But as you go through these phases of life, I mean, I'm almost 50 now, I can tell you that every phase that you go through is a learning experience. It's humbling in many ways, because as you get older, it's a humbling experience based on what you've been as the healthy, youthful self that you had is no longer there. But it's a repetitive learning and renewal experience. Without that, there's an increase in mental illness. Your quality of life is better, but at the same time, there's a downside. You have to pay the piper at some point. So what they do is they engineer worlds like this and put people in it under a controlled state of consciousness with the mind wipe, the memory wipe. Mars, a good example of this. Mars, the reason why Mars has pyramids and megalithic temple structures that are barely standing at this point is because they had a program almost identical to what they're running here. The difference is that they had engineered the entire thing. The entire intent of that colony was to create a container body race for the purpose of therapeutic engineered lifetimes. And they used the repetitive cataclysmic cycle to reboot civilization, to keep them at a certain level of development where they would go no further and pose a threat to the ones who controlled the whole system. And that's why there's pyramids, and that's why they have the same iconography that we have here on Earth, is because it's the same religions. They had Amon Ra, they had Zeus, they had all of those same gods. They probably had Jesus Christ for all we know. They had it all, and you can see it. You can see Mayan iconography, you can see Egyptian iconography and the ruins. If you look at the right JPL images, you'll see it. You'll see the clues in the rocks. That's because, like I said, that program mirrors this one. The same God personas that we've had in ancient times is a repetitive program by the Dracos that's being utilized on other planets. And the war over souls, the war, the ancient war that you hear about in every religion, is based on the control and freedom of people's sovereignty and their souls. That's all it really is. I know from recovering memories and things, my higher self, that 23% to 24%, I think it's 23%, of the physical unit of this universe is under a quantum quarantine in a form of slavery and servitude to another group, just like we are here. And that's the angelic war against the demonic hierarchy that influences these races to exploit others who can't defend themselves. And then they exploit them, and they create worlds like this, and they recycle these religions, and they play God with them using a transdimensional AI planetary consciousness simulation that creates an augmented reality that gives them the ability to play God over people. And, it's going on elsewhere, and it's been the Farsight Institute as remote viewed aspects of this. So, there is something to point to in regard to as an example of what I'm talking about. But that's essentially the entire struggle of the human condition in a nutshell. Do you have any questions?
I've got a lot of questions, but I don't know if we can get into all of them tonight.
Well, go ahead, shoot me a couple. I'll answer them. If you want to do a part 2, we can always do that, and I can bring other people on.
Yeah, we could probably do that. I guess my question with everything is, if they have the ability to control consciousness, like they can take a piece of people's soul, this and that, what is the big secret about it in general? They could just do it all without anyone ever knowing, if we're all just basically in a simulation anyways. The whole concept, to me, I struggle with it, because it's like, if they're that powerful, they have all this technology, they have all these abilities and everything else, and we're basically just cattle in a sense. They're using us for the souls and everything else. Why even let us have this? How can someone break free everything else? Like we should be, they could just control us and we'd never know anyways. Like what we're living in right now is just a simulation.
Well, that's the way it's been. What is your question though? Is it how do we break free, or
Basically is like if they have all this power and everything and we're living in this simulation, how does someone break free from that?
well, they're not all powerful. As you know, they definitely have a dominion over humanity right now, but they're losing their grip on that. So they don't have the final authority. God is the final authority. The one thing that you'll find in that's a common position in the New Age movement is to describe God as a force of nature that has no individual personality or consciousness. To define God as being a piece, to define us as being a piece of God, and that's it, and it's just us, and kind of an energetic medium that creates our reality. So they have to diminish God, and it's why they've done it in these belief systems. But we do have God. God is like the arbiter, the referee. And to describe why it's like that is because you have an infinite consciousness that's by itself, that needs something to entertain itself with. So it became all of us, but it also remained separate to preserve the continuity of itself so that it can maintain order, because through our creation, we're given free will, and there's a negative and a positive spectrum here. So, that causes the interaction. You have to have an action potential. That's it. You have to have a push and a pull, or a yin and a yang. But, the answer really is we have God, and we have beings that work for God, which is I'm referred to him as the angelics, because that's how I was asked to refer to him as, because it's easier for people to understand, but it's not exactly like what people think it is. I mean, they live on planets amongst themselves. They are connected to God as close as you can get. I mean, God is like a piece of their consciousness. I know from digging into my own self and my higher self, I don't have free will like, you would think we have. I mean, my free will essentially is serving the creator. That's what I found inside me. It wasn't, because, if you think about it, why would you want to do this? Why would you want to go to it? Why would you want to incarnate in a life like this where you have to suffer and be a target and be punished just for being here like this and go through this? The people don't appreciate you. They'll stone you to death. They'll send you to prison. They'll steal from you. They'll lie to you. They'll abuse you, and they'll kill you and leave you dead in the streets. They'll leave you dead in a shopping center, and nobody will care. They'll step over you. It's like, why would you do that? Well, you do it for God, and you do it because they don't know any better. They've been conditioned to treat each other like this. Without that connection to the creator, there's no grounding for someone. Anything goes at that point. Any level of horrendous act towards another can go. And that's why these negative races are doing what they're doing. And they have manipulation from, like I said, a demonic hierarchy that controls them to a degree, and then puts them up to doing this. They benefit from exploiting others. They lessen their own personal burden of existence at the level they're at by exploiting us. So the answer really to your question is that humanity itself can't do anything. It's too late for them to do something. Dr. Courtney Brown talks about this a lot, and the research and remote viewing work that they do, as well as connecting with positive extraterrestrials and relaying that information. But I've gotten the same information myself, only slightly different. I was told that there's multiple timelines. You can go into the future and you can look at all of them. It's like exploring different, it's like a flow chart of possibilities. Each timeline is a stream of thoughts in the mind of God of just, you could change one thing and then it changes everything. And then it's a different timeline. But, when God makes a decision, it doesn't matter, what those timelines say. If you go into it, you're going to see the majority of the timelines going into one event, to one series of events. In regard to this planet, the bad ones lose. That's what should be the takeaway here. And I will tell you this, the nature of the universe as it really is, compared to what we perceive being here on this planet with 5 senses only to deal with and very weak psychic abilities, and most people don't have them. We have a different viewpoint of the universe. We think it's like Star Trek. It's just planets and spacecraft, and you got to travel in distances. It's really not like that. It's a more fluid type of existence. It's closer to the heaven that people perceive in their mind, where everything is more fluid. And, your mind and your consciousness shapes your reality. The higher you go on the pecking order of advancement in the, I guess you could call it the hierarchy of creation, the more fluid reality becomes, to the point where you have total control over it. And the angelic side of it, if they want to put their thumb in their mouth and blow it up and make a giant hand like you'd see in a cartoon, they could do that. If they want to change their shape and change their species, their gender, they can do it at will. They can shapeshift. They can be at any point in conscious existence at any time at the speed of thought that they need to be. But when you go down from that, you get down to this reality that we're in right here. And this reality is artificial. It's not the real true baseline reality that is in the normal nature of the universe and all the multiverse, really. We're in a baseline reality that's been dropped down 1 or 2 notches into this augmented reality, because no one in this existence is non-psychic. And we can see the difference between humans and animals because they're not targeted. We are. A dog has more psychic ability than a person. And when I have low level psychic abilities, and now it's in control of my higher self. So it's where before they were in control of it. But through both of those states, I've been able to connect with my dog and my cat, and to the level where I recognize that they're picking up my thoughts and emotions, not as powerful, not as intuitive as another person would be if they were fully psychic, but more powerful and more intuitive than most psychics are. Animals can pick up a lot of things in the environment that we can't. And it's just like I said, it's because they're the ones who aren't being targeted by the system. The AI system that creates this reality is fully intuitive. It knows exactly who you are. And the reason why the ETs can operate in this space is because through the application of etheric implants, and because it's an intuitive system, it can suppress consciousness of one person and completely leave another one alone if that's what it's programmed to do. So in case you're wondering, that's how that works. And when they take somebody out of this planet and put them in an off-world program, those etheric implants travel with them. They're part of their soul. They're in them, so they can suppress their consciousness. Because normally, if it wasn't for that, if you took somebody out of the resonant field of the simulation itself and you left the solar system, you'd get your memories back of who you are. And it would happen quite rapidly and be very destructive. But they couldn't care less about you, but they want to use you as a slave, so they need you functional. So they're not going to let that happen. And there would be a mutiny anyway. Nobody would want to cooperate and do what they've told them to do if they knew the true nature of their reality and why they're there and what their place is and who these beings are to them. Anyway, I kind of got off track here, but you've got anything else you want to ask?
I think we can wrap this up for now. We'll definitely get back with you. And if you have some other ones that would like to get on, we can do a group discussion. But basically, I'd like to say, to close this one out, if anyone out there listening, if you have questions or whatever, please send them my way. You can, if you're on Spotify, you can leave a comment on there, or if it's on YouTube, just write a comment on there. Whatever questions you guys have, I'll make sure we bring it up in the next discussion.
Yeah, and I'll answer anything. And you can always reach me. I'm available at the Telegram group called the Planetary. I'm sorry, it's called the Planetary Consciousness Project. You can find me there on Telegram, and my channel is Hajayan Contactee. That's You can see it on the screen actually, but it's Haujean, contactee. And I've got a heavily shadow banned YouTube channel. So, and I just wanted to mention one last thing, Brandon. I think there's a lot of people talking about this disclosure and these whistleblowers, and they're talking about, the threat narratives here. I don't believe they're pushing an alien threat narrative. I think they're going to let people ponder that for a period of time, but I can tell you that the whistleblowers that are out there are government operatives. They wouldn't allow them to talk unauthorized. Anyone with common sense could see that, if it's a matter of national security, you'd be arrested or you'd be targeted trying to, you wouldn't get to the point where you're at. They've got assets. They've got this whole thing sewn up. That's why channels like mine, and of course, I think channels like yours, are not being promoted by big tech. They're on a list by the Department of Homeland Security to be suppressed. So the threat narrative, I don't believe there's going to be a threat narrative. I think they're going to portray these extraterrestrials as humanity's saviors at some point after they've created enough chaos for us to be in the full submission and need help, at which point they will become an integrated part of our prison experience here. And that's the last thing we need. And, that's what I think is going on. And you can usually determine the agenda to some degree. It's not the best way to measure it by what big tech censors. So I'll give you an example. When these whistleblowers first came out, that first week, I went around as many news reports that I could, official, news media and independent media, such as Redacted, which is a pretty good source of information. It's in the two independent journalists, husband and wife. They broke away from mainstream media and moved to Portugal. And Clayton, the guy that does the show, is friends with Tucker Carlson. He's been on their show before and interviewed and talked about them being in the media and all the control they have. He's interviewed some people, and and no matter where I leave a comment, this is the core of this now. I'm going to explain it is, and then we'll wrap this up, is that when you go to those videos and you put a comment under there and you say, I'm a MILAB, I'm a joint military ET abduction victim, I'm in Project IBIS, surrogate, whatever, you say anything to do with abductions and MILABs, military abductions, the AI is programmed to take your comment down within an instant. Nobody sees it. They have two ways of doing this. One of which they can allow you to see your comments, so you think it's up, but it isn't. Nobody else can see it, but you can. So you think you haven't been censored. You won't know until you sign out and then just go into YouTube and look it up and see if you can see it being signed out. The way they do this is they just take it away. So when you click refresh, if you've admitted to being a MILAB and you're telling people that, because they don't want normal people, they want normal people to watch this. They hear these people's testimony, and none of them are going to talk about the dumbs. They will not speak about it. So there's one of two things going on here. Either they're covering up that they're accomplices to these negative extraterrestrials, and they don't want you to know that the militaries of different countries have treaties and are abducting their own citizens and putting them through horrendous human rights violations, human trafficking, and all of that stuff. They don't want you to know they're doing that, and they don't want you to know they're working with the extraterrestrials. or they just don't want that threat out there where you're saying that I'm being tortured by these aliens and the military's involved. They don't want you to put them in a negative light. I think it's both. I think it's a bit of both. They don't want to be seen as accomplices to this. They definitely don't want that, because we're talking about right now that we've got alien bodies and some crash wreckages and shit like that. So that stuff's been known about for a long time. Nothing these whistleblowers have said hasn't been already said by controlled assets. I'm going to name names, but there's a lot of controlled assets out there that have been talking about the need for disclosure, and all this stuff. But they always downplay the bases. They always downplay the off-planet programs. None of these assets will talk about that, because that's the biggest part of they don't want you to know. If they can just tell you there's some ETs out there, we don't know much about them, and we're going to find out eventually, we're just looking into it, that's fine. People were willing to accept that, and they're willing to accept that the people know about it because they can't keep it a secret forever. and they're not the ones calling the shots. The ETs are. This goes more than what Stephen Greer says. Stephen Greer alleges that they don't want this secret out because it'll uproot, it'll disrupt the energy cartels and the political structures. Everything will change, and that's true. But that's not they're not calling the shots. It's the ETs that are setting the agenda. They don't want people to know right now. They're the ones who are behind these whistleblowers. They're the ones who are behind the government's actions in regard to these whistleblowers. And it's a top-down system of control. And when it comes down to YouTube and big tech, they're controlled by the Department of Homeland Security of the United States government. And what they do is they don't tell Facebook or YouTube that Nathan is a threat to, is an ET or a threat to national security, or a threat to whatever. He's involved with these ETs, or he's in a military program, he's a rogue asset. They just say that I'm a threat to national security. That can mean anything. It can mean that I'm mentally ill and they're looking to see if I'm going to go off and do something to hurt people. It could be something like that. I could be anything at all. It doesn't matter. And they will put sound effects in your phone. They will take and hijack your emails. I've had emails take 5 days to go through with other MILABs. I've had phone conversations shut down. I've had internet go out with other people, like you were talking about with me earlier before we started recording. I've had bizarre special effects during interviews. And I have keyword activated sound effects in my phone, cell phone and landline, depending on which one I use for the conversations that set off the AI system. So if I'm talking about ETs with a friend in a private conversation, and the next day I call a friend and have a conversation on the phone and I bring up that conversation, I start getting sound effects. They do this to scare people. They want you to shut up. But this is how much control they have. And after 9/11, they set this infrastructure up. My mother said to me, "Why are you so important?" I said, well, at the time, I didn't know what I was involved in. But I said, Mom, I said, you don't understand. It's not that I'm important. They don't need to go through much trouble to target me. All they got to do is put me in a database. That's it. The AI system takes over. All that money they put in, the tax money they spent for that giant server farm, I think it was Utah. They've got many others since. They can do anything they want electronically. They can hack into your computer. They can take over your phone. They can get into anything. And they don't even need to use technology because they have the transdimensional access tech. That tech, that transdimensional tech allows them to monitor you at the level of your soul and your thoughts without any technology that's connected with any human surface level technological infrastructure. They don't need to spy on you through your phone or your computer, but they do. They do blanket surveillance, and then they target certain people. As was that guy Clapper said, we don't spy on people, we spy on interesting people. And it's true. They spy on everybody, but they focus on interesting people that are somehow a threat to the agenda. And, all I want is to make the world a better place and for people to stop suffering, including myself. I don't want to, I don't want to overthrow any government if it's a just government. And I'm not here to start a revolution or to hurt anybody. But, I've been heavily targeted, man. I've had my health destroyed, my life, my financial situation has been a total disaster. I said, I've been cut off from the social safety net. I've had to rely on other means to survive during periods where I was so sick that I couldn't work. And I've had constant harassment by these ETs and constant harassment by the government. And, it's a living hell. Every day I get up, it's like, I dread living another day because it's just like, when am I going to go home? When you know that you don't belong here and you really know it, it's very difficult to live with. And, I feel for everybody in this community because they exploit people and they use them to manipulate the rest of us. I mean, some of these people out there that are doing these grifts and stuff like that, I mean, they're being mind controlled. A lot of them are, to do this and be dishonest. It's just, I see a lot of myself in every one of these people, especially including the ones that are doing something wrong that I disagree with. because I know that they get into their head and they make them do it. And the easiest people to control are ones that have personality flaws to start with. So if you're prone to do something dishonest and you're in this community, this disclosure community, and they want to use you, and then you're prone to that behavior, it's very easy to control someone. And, you know, for every bad person, there's a good person waiting to come out. And, you know, so I think what we need in this community, not just in this community, we need it everywhere. We need to start loving each other. We need to put the respect and love back in all human relationships, and we need to start there. The change has to come from inside. And get a little bit emotional when I talk about that, but that's what we need. We need to heal ourselves. We need to heal each other. So I think what we need in this community here is to start coming together and stop letting them divide us, because, you know, we have to understand the methods that they use. So when you see people out there talking about the Galactic Federation, and they've got all this, the Lionsgate portal and everything, and you know, and there's a solar event coming where the sun's going to have a solar maximum. We're all going to be psychic, be med beds for everybody. Everybody will have a med bed in their house, and we're all going to be floating cars and stuff. And it's BS. And that person's being lied to, and they believe it. And fortunately, they're selling it to you. And that's the tragedy here. And, you know, you can't look at these people as being liars and frauds. You look at them as victims, because they're just as much a victim as you and everybody else in this augmented reality. And I think if we recognize that and we practice that, and we start practicing a type of universal love for one another, just through the fact that we exist, we coexist, that there should be a baseline level of compassion for each other, we could do amazing things in a society and transform it. And that's where it needs to start. It needs to start from within.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I had to say for tonight. So,
well, I definitely appreciate you coming on here and talking with me. It's been a long one, but it's very informative. I didn't have to say a whole lot, so it's always good on my end when I can just sit back and listen.
Yeah, you're my silent partner, but there's a lot more to say, and there's a lot of other people I can bring on this show.
Yeah.
It's just getting them to do it and getting them around to do it. You know, we all have these lives, and we go through periods of depression, illnesses, and things, and you know, the scheduling doesn't always work out. But like I said, I can get people to go on this show and tell a greater story, because you've already started a story with some of your guests, and I think that something needs to happen with this channel. It needs to get bigger. And you've your mind and your heart are in the right place, because you're willing to do this.
I'm just a platform, the way I see it. I'm just here to let people share their stories, because I don't feel like there's a lot of people out there doing that. So
no, there's not. There's people out there with agendas who just don't want to ruffle the feathers of the big tech or the government, and they're not doing anybody a service. They're actually inadvertently serving the enemy, because, you know, if all you want to have on is people talking about new age beliefs and tarot cards and wishy-washy stories of benevolent space brothers and sisters, you're basically selling us into slavery. You're reinforcing the prison, and you're not doing anything to help anybody but yourself. And you're not really helping yourself, because a little ad revenue isn't worth a shit, because when you die, you're going to be the property of an alien force that doesn't give a damn about you. So, and you live in a world that's a cesspool and you haven't done a thing to clear it up.
yeah, no, I agree, but I think we're going to wrap this one up. So Nathan, again, I definitely appreciate you coming on here and talking with me, and we'll definitely be back in touch, and he'll be back on here again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll do some networking and get some other voices to come here and deliver that torpedo of truth that we need to get ourselves out of this shit.
Yep, definitely. Well, again, thank you, and anyone out there listening, hope you enjoyed it. We'll get you on the next one.
Take care.